Something has been poisoning the conservative movement for 30 years. It's in the podcasts, the reels, and the content you probably consume every day. It's why the right wing is fragmenting instead of growing, and I can show you exactly where it came from. Today we're covering Chapter 14 of Black Sun by the historian Nicholas Goodrick Clark. The chapter is called Conspiracy Beliefs and the New World Order, and if every other chapter in this book felt like it was about someone else's world, esoteric Hitlerists, Norse pagans, Nazi Satanists, this chapter is about yours, because you are in the conspiracy world. You might not think you are, but you are. If you've listened to Joe Rogan, watched Tucker Carlson, followed Ian Carroll, or Candace Owens, or Alex Jones, if you so much as scrolled past a reel about the deep state, FEMA camps, or what they don't want you to know, you've been drinking from a well that was poisoned long before you got there. I know because I drank from it too. I spent 20 years in the New Age, Burning Man, ashrams, the whole journey. And in that world, conspiracy thinking comes standard. Galactic civilizations, the moon being fake, shadow governments, it's all part of the package. When I became a Christian, I threw out everything except the conspiracy worldview, because I didn't recognize it for what it was. This chapter is where I finally saw it. It was like looking in a mirror, and it started with a question. What has this world actually produced? Because the American right has been marinating in conspiracy content for over 30 years, accelerating since COVID. So what is the fruit? Has it produced strong families? Or has it produced men so consumed by decoding reality that they can't be present at the dinner table? Do righteous fathers look like Alex Jones, screaming about the globalists for 20 years? Or do they look like Ron Paul, a man who asked hard, uncomfortable questions about government overreach for decades and never lost his soul in the process? Ron Paul didn't need conspiracy theories. He read the Constitution and followed it. His son Rand does the same. This isn't a political endorsement. I'm not endorsing everything either of them believes, but they ask hard questions, keep their families intact, and probably don't get red-faced about the Illuminati at Thanksgiving. Has it produced durable institutions? Or has it produced a movement where every institution is suspect, every leader might be controlled opposition, and nothing can be built because nothing can be trusted? Has it produced political victories that last? Because QAnon didn't deliver the White House. It delivered the QAnon Shaman, bare-chested, horned, and raving on the floor of Congress, wearing the skin of a movement he had nothing to do with. That image went around the world. And for millions of people, that became the face of the American right. Has it produced hope for the future? Or has it produced men who won't have children because the world is always about to collapse? The New Agers said 2012. QAnon said the storm was coming. It's always coming. It never arrives. And men waste years waiting for an apocalypse that doesn't happen instead of building a legacy that will outlast them. Has it produced trustworthy alliances? Or has it produced an affinity for Islam that would have been unthinkable to the conservative movement 20 years ago? There's an image circulating right now. A Muslim warrior and a Christian crusader standing side by side, looking at a crowd of degenerates puppeted by a Jewish caricature. Together. That's where 30 years of conspiracy thinking delivered the right wing, into the arms of a civilization that has been at war with Christianity for 1400 years. Because they both hate the Jews, and I guess the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Just this week, Russell Brand sat down with Tucker Carlson and suggested that the killing of Charlie Kirk was carried out not by the man standing trial, but by the, quote, most powerful interest, by which he means Israel.
And whenever there's a lone gunman, just some crackpot. Hey, these crackpots, I noticed that a lot of the time they do stuff that really benefits the most powerful interests. I tell you what, the powerful should start using these lone gunmen because, there's a natural alliance. It's a good fit. It's like Coca-Cola and McDonald's. The two of them go there, and like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and the Olympics, If you find people that are prominent and outspoken and willing to risk their lives, probably what you should do is shoot them dead and then blame like something that will work in the culture, like, I don't know, trans people. that would work.
He's suggesting Tyler Robinson was framed while making Israel the actual scapegoat. Brand has been a public figure for 20 years. Carlson has been in politics for 30. Between them, they reach millions. And this is what they're using that reach to do. The conspiracy worldview doesn't build. It only decodes and destroys. It produces seekers, not fathers. investigators, not worshippers, paranoia, not peace, even if some people do make a very good living on it. So is there a reason for that? Is there a reason why the fruit is universally rotten across every branch of the conspiracy world for 30 years running? Yes, and it's documented in this chapter, because the tree was planted in poisoned soil. Conspiracy thinking about secret societies has existed since the 1790s. Freemasons, the Illuminati, the French Revolution. But those early conspiracy theories were not anti-Semitic. They were about secular threats to the church and crown, not Jews. That changed with one document. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion fused anti-Semitism into the conspiracy framework and gave it its modern totalizing form. Before the Protocols, the conspiracy was about Freemasons acting alone. After the Protocols, the conspiracy was about Jews using Freemasons and the Illuminati as front organizations for world domination. The Protocols didn't create conspiracy thinking, they weaponized it. And that weaponized version is what the modern conspiracy world was built on, not infiltrated by, built on. Bill Cooper published Behold a Pale Horse in 1991. It sold over 500,000 copies. This is the foundational text of American conspiracy culture, and chapter 15 of that book is a complete reprint of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Not a summary, not a reference, the full text, the 1923 Marsden translation, cover to cover. Now Cooper knew what he was printing. He told his readers to substitute Illuminati for Jews and cattle for Goyim, a thin disguise over a document that had already been used to incite a genocide. But Cooper didn't just print it, he built his entire worldview on top of it. A secret elite is waging war against you. You are being enslaved, and peaceful citizens are justified in taking, and I'm quoting Cooper directly, any measures, including violence, to identify, counterattack, and destroy the enemy. That's the man at the root of the conspiracy tree, not a fringe blogger, not an anonymous account. The man who wrote the book calling for violence based on a forgery. David Icke came next. His 1994 book, The Robots' Rebellion, quotes the Protocols extensively and cites Cooper as a source. When confronted with the fact that Hitler used the exact same document to justify the extermination of 6 million Jews, Icke's defense was, because Hitler used knowledge for negative reasons, doesn't reflect on the knowledge itself. Sit with that for a second. The man who built the second pillar of the modern conspiracy movement was told that the document at its foundation had been used to justify genocide. And his answer was, the document is fine. Cooper called for violence. Icke was told the Protocols produced genocide and shrugged. These are not distant figures from a forgotten era. These are the two men whose work is the direct ancestor of every conspiracy podcast, every what they don't want you to know reel, every red pill thread on your timeline. You don't have to read Cooper or Icke. If you consume conspiracy content, you have absorbed their framework. The names changed. The structure didn't. The conspiracy infrastructure sat there for 30 years before most people encountered it. Then COVID hit. Millions of people went searching for explanations. The explanations were already written. Nobody had to draft them. The doors opened and people walked in. Nothing was invented in 2020. The existing worldview was simply made available to everyone at once. The darkening prospects for conservatism are not a mystery. They are the direct product of drinking poisoned water for 30 years. And the poison was there from the very first cup. It's on your Spotify subscriptions right now. It's in your YouTube recommendations. It's on your Instagram. Blurry creatures, haunted cosmos, stuff they don't want you to know, the cult of conspiracy, even conspiracy theories by Spotify themselves. These aren't fringe shows hiding in a corner of the internet. They're mainstream entertainment with millions of downloads, and every single one of them is downstream of a world that was built on a forged document. Now, just because you consume or produce conspiracy content doesn't make you an anti-Semite like David Lane or Miguel Serrano. That's not the point. And I'm not standing outside this throwing stones. Last year, after I had already read Black Sun, I released a conspiracy-adjacent interview about the Beatles that I found genuinely compelling. I didn't connect the dots to what I had read, even after I read it again. That's how deep the worldview runs. You can be staring right at the evidence and still not see it in your own work. But upstream from the place in the river you're drinking from, the water has been poisoned at the source. How does it taste now? So if the conspiracy worldview has produced nothing but rot in your life, in your politics, in your ability to trust, in your capacity to raise your children with confidence and hope, then the question isn't whether to keep consuming it. The question is what you're going to replace it with. I'd start with scripture, with the church, with a pastor you trust, with the peace that passes understanding, which is the one thing the conspiracy world has never produced and never will. Because here's what the conspiracy worldview was actually designed to do. Not to inform you, not to liberate you, not to wake you up. It was designed to make you afraid. And afraid men don't build, they don't plant, they don't raise sons with confidence or lead families with peace. They hide, they rage, and they wait for a storm that never comes. That's not what you were made for. You were made to build, to plant, to raise the next generation with faith, not fear. And you can't do that while you're drinking poisoned water and calling it revelation. If you want to understand how you got here, how the American right ended up paranoid, fragmented, allied with Islam against the Jews, and unable to build anything that lasts, I'd start with Black Sun. The first 50 pages are free on Kindle. Download them. Read them. Don't take my word for it. I'll be recording a final session where I cover Goodrick Clark's conclusion, the politics of identity, and what it all means for where we go from here. My wife also has a baby due any day now, so I ask for your patience on the timing, but I intend to give that discussion the weight it deserves. Let's get into Chapter 14. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final Black Sun Reading Club edition. A bonus, not really a bonus, but a bonus 7th session where we're going to do a deep dive on I believe it's chapter 14, Conspiracy Beliefs and the New World Order, and then the conclusion, the politics of identity. So if you listen to the last edition about Nordic racial paganism, I intended to do chapters 13 and 14 together, but we dived so deep into Nordic racial paganism that I felt it would be best to set aside an entire whole session for conspiracy beliefs in the New World Order. And there are lots of reasons for that. One of the reasons for it is I think even if you've never heard of David Lane, Savitri Devi, Julius Evola, Lincoln Rockwell, Miguel Serrano, or even a single, white power neo-Nazi band, even if you've never heard of any of that, you've never even touched it, the names and ideas that we are going to discuss in this chapter, you have undoubtedly heard some or even many of them without question. The reason why I feel confident in saying that is that we today all live in the post-COVID era. In fact, it was just about 6 years ago that all that was going down, certainly climbing to its peak. And in the COVID era, as I think many of you listening will know, that became a breeding ground for all manner of conspiracy theories to become not just accessible, but following that normalized, and then not just normalized, meaning like everyone's just talking about this, but also amplified and even celebrated. That all began in 2020. People who had never heard of conspiracy theories, never paid any attention to that world, never ever took it seriously, suddenly found that in the COVID and post-COVID era, that conspiracy theories that had previously been relegated to the fringes of discussion about politics and culture suddenly became not just occasional references, found in various podcasts, but now the substance of the podcasts themselves. Meaning, like, probably the most popular media influencer in the world right now is Joe Rogan. And of course, he's been into conspiracy content for a very long time. I think that's been an early part. It was a part of his content from very early on. And I know for a fact he was talking about ayahuasca pretty early on, and that's a whole other conversation. But now I would say, with regard to conspiracy culture, Joe Rogan is actually pretty middle of the road, because you have people like Ian Carroll, who have made a fortune on conspiracies, has become a major influencer. You have Candace Owens, who is a major influencer, and her entire platform now is conspiracies. Her entire platform is conspiracy. The headline is no longer the subject of discussion. It's always what's going on behind the headline. That's Candace Owens. Tucker Carlson, very similar, right? And of course, if I haven't mentioned him already, Alex Jones. Alex Jones is a huge, huge deal. Alex Jones used to be relatively fringe, and we're going to talk about the Patriot movement that he's likely a part of. This book doesn't mention Art Bell, who was also one of the early conspiracy broadcasters, but Alex Jones comes out of kind of a merging of those two, and now Alex Jones InfoWars is a huge media property that has launched many significant careers. He himself is a multi-millionaire and significant political influencer. He doesn't appear on stages at major mainstream political conferences, but everyone knows, who he is. And of course, the meme is going around, Alex Jones was right, chemicals in the water, making the frogs gay, stuff like that. Like, that's Alex Jones. So now if you take a look at Ian Carroll, let's just set aside Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, who are relatively new to some of the more conspiracy-oriented stuff. But if you look at Joe Rogan, and you look at Alex Jones, and you look at Ian Carroll, just those are three of the biggest names in media right now. And they have been for a while. And so now conspiracy culture is no longer something that's relegated to the fringes of discussion. It is now considered mainstream entertainment. Maybe it's not on network television just yet, but people turned off mainstream media in favor of conspiracy podcasts. You could even make the case that shows like Blurry Creatures and Haunted Cosmos, for all of their success, are sort of drawing off some of that, right? Probably more than just some of it, right? Of course, the manosphere, that's a whole other separate subject of conversation. But the gynocracy, that idea, is essentially conspiracy based in origin. And I would say that probably most conversations that people have right now are not about what's being reported, but about the machinations behind the scenes of what's being reported. The proverbial tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more. The deep state, topics like this, subjects like this, I think they're just part of the dialogue now. It's conspiracies is the lens through which people now view the world. I would say QAnon, of course, QAnon is enormous conspiracy stuff. There's the Q drops, which was the figure that was on 4chan. That was how Q identified itself. And then the QAnon phenomenon was the community that surrounded Q, the figure, whoever or whatever it was. So that's QAnon. I think it's even possible, and we're going to get to the big kicker in just a minute. I think it's even possible, I'm pretty sure I saw this yesterday, that J.D. Vance on stage at a campaign rally, maybe it was in Georgia, something like that, I think he referenced Pizzagate, huge conspiracy thing around child sex trafficking. And of course, that leads us to Jeffrey Epstein and the release of the Jeffrey Epstein files. So not just what Jeffrey Epstein, the abhorrent things that Jeffrey Epstein and his network were doing, but the conspiracy to suppress the conspiracy, right? And then you look at P. Diddy, the whole thing with what's going on in the music industry, occult symbolism and movies, just reels on Instagram that I just saw even today around Artemis, the trip to the moon, which I haven't paid attention to even like a second of. Are they still up there? Are they? I don't know. Like, I heard there was a takeoff on April 1st. And I heard it was a joke. That was the first thing that I heard about it. But then I found out apparently it really happened. But everyone's saying it's a joke. And did they leave? Are they back? I know nothing. I know nothing about it. But the whole subject around that, conspiracies. So I would say that conspiracy topics are, in many senses, more important than the actual news cycle today. I would probably say that what happens is there's the events of the day, the news that we receive, whatever the headlines is, and we'll just stipulate that the reporting is factual. But it's almost like that isn't the news anymore. The news is now the reaction to the news. It's not X happened. It's the interpretation now from podcasters and other influencers, Christian and otherwise, is what are the machinations behind X. And it's not, X is no longer the headline. I don't mean X, the platform, obviously, but an event happens. And now the actual news isn't just about the event, but all the things behind the scenes for the event, the speculation, the fluffing up of, circumstantial evidence, things like that. That is now the actual the actual news cycle for many, many people. And of course, X, the platform, has amplified that massively. YouTube, of course, is a huge part of that. I'm pretty sure that if you want to have a successful long form video on YouTube, you want it to do well, imply a conspiracy behind it. And people will tune in. I'm certainly guilty of that, of ways to frame things that hooks people's curiosity, right? In fact, I have a podcast, well, when I'm recording this, it's coming out tomorrow. I have a podcast this week talking about Israel and Zionism, and the way that I framed the podcast on my channel is the conspiracy, that the question that drives people mad, which the Jewish question, the question of Israel and the Jews, that does actually drive people mad, and that was a significant subject of discussion in the podcast. I've seen it, and I'm sure you have as well. It doesn't take long to look on X and see what it's done to people. And of course, real quick, in the previous sessions that I've done, I talked about this book, Anti-Semite and Jew by Jean-Paul Sartre. And that's essentially what he's saying, is that anti-Semitism drives people insane. It turns people to stone. I'm looking forward to reading this. So this is not a new phenomenon. So the point behind all this is that even if you've never heard of any of the more fringe, esoteric, neo-Nazi, esoteric Hitlerist, Aryan supremacist, or even pro-Nazi, like Lincoln Rockwell, Colin Jordan kind of groups, even if you've never heard of a single one of them, you've undoubtedly been involved in the conspiracy world, if only as a passive recipient to someone telling you the latest conspiracy theory, if only as a joke. If only as a joke. But sometimes it's much more serious than that. So this last chapter of Black Sun, Conspiracy Beliefs in the New World Order, is going to be relevant to basically everyone, I think, today who's listening. I'm going to go on a limb and say more than 90% of you will find something in here to be relatable. And of course, I find it to be personally very relatable, because one of the things that he touches on, that Nicholas Goodrick Clark touches on in the chapter, is how conspiracy beliefs are specifically related to the New Age. There's a couple whole pages about that. And the New Age was my entry into conspiracy beliefs. In fact, I remember, let's see, I'll get into this as we talk about Bill Cooper, who appears in the story. I was not into conspiracies. I was on to conspiracies around the turn of the millennium, like 2000 to like 2013, something like that. Maybe around like early 2000, because I was like in the DJ world, and it was a new age world for sure. There was a lot of discussion about conspiracies, but I remember, sometime after 2003, I got out of the conspiracy conversation. I remember seeing Zeitgeist, the documentary Zeitgeist, in 2006. And I sort of looked at it a little bit then, but I remember I was in the working world from, we'll call it 2004, 2005 to like 2011, something like that. And I didn't believe in conspiracies at all, actually. I was like, I'm here at this office of just 100 people, and how do you get 100 individuals all going in the same direction? How incredibly difficult it is. And now how are you going to get thousands of people all over the world aligned for common purpose when they have competing agendas? How are you going to get all these people going in the same direction? I found it incomprehensible after being in the corporate world. But then when I went diving into the New Age world more heavily in 2012, so first Occupy Wall Street in San Francisco in 2010, 2011, that was when I started wondering about, as I'm seeing all these competing liberal political interest groups all saying the spotted owl is the most important thing, Gaza is the most important thing, protecting this forest is the most important thing, the big banks, oil, whatever it is. Yeah, of course, maybe many of you remember the subject of peak oil. That's another conspiracy topic that was quite popular for a moment. But that aside, I looked at all these different liberal political causes that were trying to, get seen and heard inside Occupy. And I started asking, well, are all these connected somehow? Is it not just a bunch of surface manifestations? Is there something deeper? And so that was the beginning. This was in like 2012, something like that. Of course, in 2012, I heard all about like being near the New Age world at that point, the leap into hyperspace on December 21st, 2012. Maybe you heard about some of that as well. I didn't believe any of that, by the way. I thought it was silly, because I don't think history works that way. And, I heard, of course, crazy fundamentalist Christian groups talking about the rapture, and I saw crazy left-wing New Age groups talking about the leap into hyperspace, and I was like, well, if both the extreme left and the extreme right are both talking about something in different language happening on the same day, December 21st, 2012, if they're both talking about this, I'm pretty sure they're both, it's definitely not going to happen. Real horseshoe theory. You know what I mean? I was like, is it going to be the rapture, or is it going to be the leap into hyperspace? Like, you know what I mean? And so I thought for that, those are not compatible visions. And so I was like, okay, I just kind of speculated to myself that they were both wrong. But then it was in 2013 that I dived even deeper into the New Age, specifically after a trip to Burning Man and meeting a bunch of conspiracy folks, and that's when I fell headlong into that world. And so that was when I began encountering what I call the deep New Age. So it's not just about crystals and channeling and stuff like that. And he's going to get into this in the book. We'll read it in a moment, starting to get to the reasons behind the things. And so when I've talked in previous sessions about when you throw out a biblical cosmology, theology, and anthropology, you have to go fishing. The reason why I'm so passionate about that is because that's what I did. I didn't know about I didn't have a biblical framework. I didn't even know what that looked like. I was living in San Francisco. I had never encountered a Bible believing Christian, at least not to my knowledge. I'm sure that they are there, but they weren't in my circles. So I came pre-bundled kind of without one. And so some of the things that I've believed during my trip through the New Age started getting into, things of like galactic significance. I won't call them cosmic, galactic significance, with aliens and the moon is fake and stuff like that. Like, when you throw out a biblical explanation of reality, you get into some pretty crazy ideas. And the reason why I'm passionate about that is because I was in those worlds. Now, of course, Nazism was not a part of those worlds, but I will say that the protocols of the Elders of Zion were a part of that world. And so as he starts talking about the New Age, you're going to see it in just a minute, as he starts talking about the New Age, this is very real and very relevant to me, because that was where I got exposed to these ideas, right? And the reason why I highlight that is, again, you may not know who Miguel Serrano is. You may not know or care who Savitri Devi or Lincoln Rockwell is. Fine. I didn't either. But I was in the New Age world, which has significant Venn diagram overlap with the conspiracy world. And as we will see in this chapter, the conspiracy world has the protocols of the Elders of Zion at the center of it. And you are going to see in just a moment, literally just a moment, in this chapter, the protocols of the Elders of Zion is mentioned more times than in any other chapter. It is mentioned with just about every figure that we're going to talk about. And it's mentioned basically on every single page. The protocols, sometimes in their explicit form, meaning popular conspiracy books reprinted with the protocols in them. And so the conspiracy world, at the center of it, is explanations for the New World Order, conspiracy beliefs in the New World Order. At the center of the beliefs about the New World Order is the protocols of the Elders of Zion. Now, they might not pin it precisely on Jews, and we're going to see that they kind of change some of the language, say, well, when it says Jews and Goyim here, that's not what it means. You're going to see that in just a minute. But it's still the protocols of the Elders of Zion that promote a conspiratorial, one world government, world tyrannical socialism view. That is at the center of the conspiracy world. And because the New Age and the conspiracy world have significant overlap between them, that's how I was exposed to those ideas. That was how I got exposed to them, and they were just part of that world, right? It was just kind of the worldview that you embody, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. It's because of my time in the New Age. I had thrown out all of the, we'll call it the theological beliefs, in the New Age world. I had burned my tarot cards. I had thrown out things, just like I do what every New Age person does when they become a Christian: destroy everything that you have. But the one thing that I hadn't destroyed was the worldview. And that was the worldview that I carried forward into my content creation up until July of 2024, when I interviewed Stone Choir. And so right now, like as we speak, I'm planning to interview Hitler Hated Christ at not_our_guy on X, Hitler Hated Christ, this coming Monday, to talk about his counter documentary, I guess you'd say, that he made, exposing the lies in Stone Choir's infamous episode, The Big Lie, which is about Holocaust denialism. Now, you would think that that episode would be a red flag for someone, but it wasn't a red flag for me because I had heard all of those tropes before. I had heard them all, right? They were the world that I came out of. They were ideas that I had not critically examined, as I wrote about in my Christ Overall article. These were the things, this was the last piece that I had to be sanctified of, quite painfully, coming out of the New Age world. The New Age conspiracy beliefs. So now, right, so the conspiracy beliefs that inform the New Age, that inform where I was, that was the last bit I had to throw out to come to a biblical understanding of theology, cosmology, anthropology, and also of the so-called Jewish question, right? So that was me and my journey. That's why when I started reading Black Sun, I was like, oh dear, especially when I got to this last chapter, which we're going to read, which was like looking in a mirror. Like, right, long before I came around, this book was again published in 2002. I came into the rave scene in the year 2000. So when this book was being published, I was just kind of entering in to my journey, right? So, of course, it crosses my path 22 years later, 25 years later, something like that. And it was like looking in a mirror. And that's why this book was such a significant turning point for me in July of 2024. It led to an immediate change once I witnessed what was going on inside my own head, my own heart, my own beliefs about reality. And that's why I'm reading this book to you today. That's why I've recommended this book so many times in the past couple years. And I, again, as you've heard me say many times, I'm reading this book to you because I know that people aren't going to read it. I know that it's a dry academic textbook, essentially. So we're going to read it. I'm going to explain why it's so relevant. So my journey is into the New Age, being exposed to conspiracy beliefs, right? Exiting the New Age, which, product plug, I have a new course out called Exiting the New Age, called exactly that explains what the New Age is and takes it all apart from the inside. You can go to willspencer.co/exit and you can pick up that course. So that's cool. So coming into the New Age, absorbing the conspiracy beliefs, exiting the New Age into public ministry, if that's what you want to call it. People have called it that, into creating content, but then one New Age belief, one conspiracy belief from the New Age held on, which around the question of the Jews, had to be sanctified to that. Now here I am. Okay, but how is this relevant for you? Because now everyone is drinking from the conspiracy water fountain, and they're drinking poisoned water. Because as you will see in this chapter, conspiracy content, the conspiracy mindset, the conspiracy worldview, from some of the biggest conspiracy names, Bill Cooper and David Icke. Now, you may not know those names. You probably know the name of David Icke. But long before there was an Alex Jones, long before there was an Ian Carroll, even long before there was a Joe Rogan, there was Bill Cooper and there was David Icke. Those were the first huge names. Bill Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse. Of course, there were others, and we'll hear some names, but they weren't as influential as Bill Cooper's book, Behold a Pale Horse was. And certainly they were not as influential as David Icke. And David Icke explicitly, as we'll see in just a moment, talks about the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So now everyone has, by force essentially, entered into the conspiracy conversation. And the lineage of the conspiracy conversation, again, even if you've never heard of Lincoln Rockwell or Miguel Serrano or anyone in between, everyone who enters into the conspiracy conversation has now been exposed to the worldview of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, even if you don't know what that is. And so we're going to see on every chapter, on basically every page of this book, the protocols mentioned again and again, including some in-depth exploration of them. So if you're consuming conspiracy content about this world, global kind of conspiracy to enslave humanity, you are just even if you've never heard it applied to the name of the Jews specifically, you're a half step away from that. Because where that idea came from, where it originated in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, was the protocols of the Elders of Zion. That's where that conspiratorial worldview came from. That's where it came from. And so now it's been exported forward in time. We'll talk about this a little bit. It informed the worldview of the Nazis. Specifically, Hitler mentions it in Mein Kampf. The reason why the book by Norman Cohn is called Warrant for Genocide is because the protocols frame a covert war being waged against against Christian civilization. A covert war is being waged by the Jews against Christian civilization. And when war is being waged against you, what do you have? You have the right to wage war back do you not? That's sort of just war theory in a sense. And so if the protocols of the elders of Zion frame the Jews as waging war against Christian civilization, then you then have the consent of your conscience to wage war back against the Jews. The protocols of the elders of Zion provided that justification, that warrant to commit genocide. That is what the Nazis believed. The Nazis lost, they were destroyed, but the protocols were not. And the protocols existed in the fringes of culture, beginning like the 1950s. We go back to Lincoln Rockwell. I think it was Lincoln, like an old lady. I think if we can go back and listen to the transcript, it was some old lady who was talking to Lincoln Rockwell and exposed him to anti-Semitic writings. It doesn't specifically say the protocols, but Lincoln Rockwell heard about this stuff really early on. So it shows back up almost immediately after the war. It floats out there and influencing generation after generation of neo-Nazis, still being published, still being out there, still being essentially in print. And then what happens? You have up until the dawn of the internet, David Lane, Miguel Serrano, 2000. We talked about that in the last episode. The internet then, now, by the way, just as an aside, when the protocols were first published in the early 1900s, they were selling more than the Bible. Like I'm reading another book right now, and I've talked about this, A Rumor About the Jews, Conspiracy, Anti-Semitism, and the Protocols of Zion. This book by Stephen Eric Bronner. This book just keeps getting better. Again, he's a Marxist. He's a critical theorist. It doesn't really, at least so far, halfway through, it hasn't shown up in the book. But this is a brilliant history so far about the protocols in ways that Warrant for Genocide doesn't touch on. When the protocols were published, they were supported not just by governments. They were supported by governments, the National Socialist government, the Russian Tsarist loyalist government. It was published in British newspapers. Henry Ford, the International Jew, published it. It was massively widespread. It was an explosion. As the world was becoming more global, the global scapegoat was fabricated in the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So it was out there. The Nazis were destroyed. They lost. But the protocols continued, and they continued forward for the next 50 or so years until the dawn of the internet era. And the internet took the protocols and served for them a similar function to the printing press, just blasted it around the entire world instantaneously at people's fingertips. And you will see how it informed Bill Cooper and then David Icke, who formed the foundations of the conspiracy movement that is now part of our everyday lives in terms of the headlines and the influencers and the content creators that many millions of people follow. That's the story. And so as I work through this chapter, you're going to hear ideas. You may not recognize the names, although some of you might. You're going to hear ideas that probably sound really familiar. And if you were like many people during COVID, including me, as the notion of New World Order, or QAnon as well, sort of became, Q and QAnon promoted these ideas too. As these ideas became very popular as a world unifying theory of how everything works, that is the protocol's worldview. It's not always explicitly tied to the Jews, but it often is, and you're one step removed from it. And that is what this chapter in Black Sun is going to talk about, how the conspiracy worldview is informed by the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And for that reason, again, as we continue the book club, I would like to read Norman Cohn, Warrant for Genocide, again at orbooks.com, I believe. You can get this for $20. Please don't buy the $250 version of this book on eBay. You don't have to. You can get it from OR Books for $20. So someone is entrepreneurial with eBay. Quick note, by the way, one of the members of my church purchased this book, and he's like, that OR Books is a crazy leftist website. Yes, it is a crazy leftist. Yes, it is a crazy leftist website. However, the book is not a crazy leftist book. And we did talk about, it's kind of funny that a crazy leftist website would be publishing this, considering that the left has now turned so substantially on the Jews around the issue of Palestine. So we had a good little chuckle about the irony in that. But anyway, you can go to orbooks.com. You can get a $20 copy of Warrant for Genocide by Norman Cohn. If you'd like to go deeper into the protocols, again, here's The Plot by Will Eisner, which gets into a slightly updated story of how the protocols were fabricated in comic book form, which is pretty cool to read. And if you want to go even deeper into academic study of them, you can read A Rumor About the Jews by Stephen Eric Bronner. This is a more academic and scholarly paper. These are just 3 books of like countless of them, by the way. Like these are not the only 3 books that have been written on the subject. They're the 3 that I've been working on, and of course, I can recommend all 3. At least I can recommend Rumor About the Jews quite strongly from only being halfway through it. Perhaps I'll provide some sort of updates if that feels necessary. If I read it and find anything I substantially disagree with, other than its citation of the Jesus Seminar, but that's a whole other conversation. But this is also a good history as well. And so even if you don't read any of those books, my hope is that, I think you can probably get away with reading The Plot by Will Eisner. It's a comic book. And if anyone's like, bro, why are you reading a comic book? It's like, well, it's about some important conspiracy material. Like, oh, a conspiracy material comic book? That sounds pretty cool. And so maybe you can help expose people to. So even if you don't read any of the scholarly treatments, either Warrant for Genocide or Rumor About the Jews, maybe you can pick up The Plot and you can see that as well. And then you can put it together with my reading of the content of Chapter 14, Conspiracy Beliefs in the New World Order, and you can see how these 2 things fit together very closely. Now, I want to make one thing pretty clear. Another name I forgot to mention also is Tim Dillon. He's a sort of a comedian, and he does sort of merges comedy and conspiracy. And there's another guy as well. It's not Dave Smith. It's another guy. Maybe it could be him also, who have been merging conspiracy and comedy kind of stuff. And so that's another face that the conspiracy as an entertainment genre has shown up, weaving conspiracy ideas into, what sometimes can be pretty funny, comedians, but it's just a testimony to how much we're all exposed to conspiracy ideas through many different channels. And so again, just to reiterate the point, 2 points. One is that the conspiracy worldview is informed by the protocols of the Elders of Zion, and we're going to see that over and over again in this chapter. And again, as you've heard me say, none of this is new. None of this is new. The ideas that seem edgy and fresh on your timeline that have been forbidden, that no one's allowed to talk about, people have been talking about them for a long time. And it's this historical knowledge that I think is so crucial, that people understand that we all live in a moment where our time horizons are quite short. We have very limited attention spans, the length of an Instagram reel, sometimes less, a 280 character tweet, something like that. And so that limits our ability to see far into the future. It also limits our historical perception. It also limits our ability to see backwards in time. We tend to forget anything that isn't immediate. And that's a restriction of our own attention span and a restriction of our own modes of thinking. And so an actual encounter with actual documented academic history from the pre-internet era helps expand our time horizon to begin seeing, as Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, there is nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new under the sun. So Black Sun, the reason, no pun intended, there's nothing new under the black sun either. Write that down. So the reason why we're reading this book is because I really, and I'm sure you all get this point by now. If you've been with me this long through, I don't even know how many hours of content, we're probably coming up on 20 hours of content. If you've been with me for this long, you now see that there is indeed nothing new. And a lot of these right-wing, ultra right-wing, extreme right-wing, dissident right-wing, reactionary, neo-Nazi, whatever term you want to use, there's nothing new in these ideas either. They've just been polished up for a new generation and accelerated through memes, through a new platform of social media. There's nothing, especially in conspiracies as well. So there's nothing new here. And so my hope is that realization, once it really takes root, actually provides a sense of grounding and stability. Because the idea that there's something new out there, like our minds orient towards novelty. Right? That's just how we are. One of the reasons, if you've ever traveled a bit, if you've ever been overseas, one of the reasons why at 24 hours, this is my theory, 24 hours seems to pass by so slowly when we're traveling, like, oh, that was just yesterday, feels like weeks ago. The reason why I think that is because everything is new and novel. And so our perception of time slows down in response to novelty. Weeks will pass by quickly in your home and in your everyday life, weeks, months, years can pass by almost in a blink of an eye. But if you travel overseas for even 3 or 4 days, it feels like months or even years, depending by comparison. The reason why that is because of novelty. We naturally orient towards novelty. So when all of these conspiracy beliefs present themselves as being new and novel, we pay very close attention to the thing that seems new. It seems very urgent that we get our minds around it, that we study it, that we understand it, and it's new. It poses, in a sense, a sort of threat. But to see, my hope is that by seeing that none of these ideas are new, they can fade into the background and be compared to a transcendent and timeless standard provided in God's word. That's I think a lot of the point behind why I want to focus on this so much, is to show that none of this is new. You don't have to look at it so closely. It is a threat. I don't mean to pretend otherwise. There are real consequences to these beliefs, but it's not a threat in the sense of like you're in immediate danger that you need to attend with all of your focus to it. Once you see that it's not new, you can contextualize it properly and give it the proper attention and the proper healthy scriptural regard. And it doesn't have to be a source of urgency or perhaps even of panic. And so as we get into this chapter, you're going to see that over and over and over again. So thank you for listening to this little introductory monologue. I think I've made my point. And so now we are going to get started on page, we're on page 279 of Nicholas Goodrick Clark's Black Sun, Aryan Cults, Esoteric Nazism, and the Politics of Identity in this edition. And then we're going to cover the conclusion as well, which, just reading through the reviews, by the way, of this book on Amazon, of which there aren't too many and not really a whole lot of new ones either. Reading through the reviews, it seems that the conclusion is quite controversial, especially for an academic. And so we're going to see why that is. And at the conclusion of the book, he's going to explain in what is essentially academic language, like, look, this is why this is a problem. And this is why these problems are going to continue. And I don't know, I'm paraphrasing essentially. I don't really know what's going to happen, but these are the mechanisms that are causing this reaction, and these mechanisms don't appear to be going away anytime soon. And almost 25 years later, I would say Goodrick Clark was right. That the mechanisms that produce the reactions that we've seen now across 13, almost 14 chapters, those mechanisms are still there. They've been accelerating, and they've been driving men to insanity. And hopefully this last chapter will make that very clear. So, page 279, chapter 14, Conspiracy Beliefs and the New World Order. This is Goodrick Clark, quote, "The 1990s witnessed political developments in both America and Europe that lent credence to a fear of big government and corporatism. The fall of the Soviet Union and the end of communism in 1990 signaled the beginning of a new phase of U.S. world hegemony, backed by frequent calls for a, quote, new world order by both President Bush and also Russian leaders." Quickly pause. I don't think I was 12 in 1990, so it's difficult for me to quite remember the significance of this, but the transition from a multipolar world of the United States and Russia or the Soviet Union to a unipolar world of the United States is what led to a lot of people thinking that we had reached the end of history. The great world nationalistic conflicts had ended. The U.S. was now ascendant. We've made it. History is over. Sit back and enjoy the ride. That was how a lot of people interpreted the decline of the Soviet Union and its ultimate collapse in 1990, was that we have reached a unipolar world and the United States is ascendant. The United States needs to lead in the construction of a new world order to ensure peace for all time. That's where the term New World Order essentially came from, oriented around liberal democracy and all of that, now that there's no longer a contest for dominance. Of course, that was false. China was beginning to build its way out, and of course, the threat of communism never really went away. And globalism would prove to be its own set of threats with its own with its own agenda that would hijack the impulse for world peace. I think there can be a righteous impulse for world peace and world unity, and which involves global homogenization. And that's the unrighteous, not the righteous. That's an unrighteous perspective on world peace, is global homogenization, where all differences and inequalities are eliminated. But I think there is a righteous vision of world peace, which is where differences aren't eliminated, but they're perfected in Christ. That we can actually come to understand. We're talking more post-millennially now, which is, I don't mean to get into eschatology. The idea that the entire all the nations and all the peoples of them can bow the knee to Christ as regenerate believers, and we can bring the kingdom in a God glorifying way to earth, not via the sword, but through converted hearts. And so, of course, I'm sure many of you are more premillennial in your disposition, or amillennial. That's probably a more postmillennial reflection of how things will work, and that's a separate discussion to what we're having. But the New World Order was essentially like, wow, America has won now, and the Soviet Union has lost. Let's start building on this new hegemony, and let's build towards a peaceful impulse. Whether that was ever sincere or not is another question, but that certainly first became possible in 1990 as in a very real sense, the age of nationalistic conflict appeared to have come to an end, at least temporarily. So resuming, the Gulf crisis and the dispatch of a U.S.-led United Nations task force for the war against Iraq, February 1991, unleashed further rhetoric about supranational government. Government regulation, already growing under the Republican administration of George Bush, received a further boost from the Democratic victory of Bill Clinton in 1992. After the external threat of Soviet communism had vanished, the increasing democratic deficit of government became a focus for nationalist fears of creeping socialism and bureaucratic authoritarianism. The increasing democratic deficit of government, meaning the government's inability to represent the views of more people, I believe is what he means, became a focus for nationalist fears of creeping socialism and bureaucratic authoritarianism. American patriots were especially concerned when President Clinton began campaigning for tighter gun control in the summer of 1993, and firearms purchases were restricted by the Brady Law of February 1994. Fears of incipient government tyranny fomented conspiracy myths among independent social groups wary of bureaucracy and increased regulation. The increasing pace of federal integration in the European Union, signposted by the Maastricht Treaty of 1993, fanned similar fears about administrative rule and a loss of national sovereignty in European states. So beginning to bind things together into a new world order, into a global kind of hegemony, fomented nationalistic fears. And then, of course, when you throw gun control regulation into that, you begin getting the nationalist, especially in America, patriot, right-wing patriot kind of movements. And I don't mean patriot in the sense it's a bad thing. That's kind of the way that these movements describe themselves. So there are a lot of globalist pressures that begin squeezing on the nations in a globalist kind of way, and that provokes. And when you throw in gun control regulation into that, you get a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear about loss of individual rights. Then Clark talks about on 19th April 1995, the blast of a massive 7,000-pound bomb ripped through the Alfred P. Murrah building, a 9-story federal government office block which housed more than 500 employees in Oklahoma City. Timothy James McVeigh, a 27-year-old Gulf War veteran, was arrested 2 days later and charged with the then worst terrorist atrocity in United States history, which had claimed the lives of 168 people and injured more than 500. McVeigh had earlier ties to the citizens militia movement, which began forming around 1992 to practice weapons training and, quote, survivalism in remote forests. The militias saw themselves as the defenders of American values and were opposed to rising taxes, growing government regulation, and plans for ID cards. Above all, they resisted President Bill Clinton's attempts to tighten up America's gun laws. The right to bear arms, enshrined in the Second Amendment of the Constitution, was regarded as a safeguard for liberty and an essential deterrent to the abuse of government authority. I believe Nicholas Goodrick Clark is British. I would need to confirm that, but I did some reading on him, and some of his other quotes used British idioms, and so that leads me to believe that he was of a British and not American origin. Not sure about that. Continuing, citizens militias existed in more than 40 states from California to Pennsylvania, with a particular concentration in the North and Midwest. However, the militias were only the armed wing of a much broader patriot movement, which included anti-tax protesters, advocates of, quote, sovereign citizenship, denial of U.S. federal authority. If you've ever heard the discussion of maritime law, that's what he's referring to. That's a whole other conversation, that the United States government has a false identity using your name in all caps, and that represents you being property of the U.S. government, and that you can deny their authority over you through use of your name with initial caps, so capital capital WILLIAM, capital SPENCER. If you receive government documents, it's your name in all caps. William Spencer, for example, in all caps. That's a fake name that the government gives you that appears to match to your real name, and so you can defy their authority because they don't actually, because they own you in some sense. It's a long conversation, and that's what he's talking about. Continuing, quote, Christian fundamentalists and anti-abortionists involving perhaps 5 to 12 million people. United by a profound suspicion of big government and its intentions, their ideology drew on a bizarre range of conspiracy theories involving hidden elites, banks, secret societies, and international organizations. These ideas were fueled by hostility toward the increased levels of federal government interference and regulation under the Clinton administration. As McVeigh journeyed through the netherworld of gun clubs, militias, and far-right groups, he had absorbed these paranoid fantasies of government's war against the people. The Oklahoma bombing not only demonstrated the terrible power of such ideas to motivate murder and mayhem, but also revealed how widespread such cultic beliefs had become in 1990s America. These conspiracy theories revealed secret plots behind everything from UFOs to gun control, from Freemasonry to AIDS, from CIA mind control experiments to the establishment of a, quote, one world government by the United Nations. By the early 1990s, 30 plus years ago, conspiracy culture could support a small but fast-growing sector of the publishing trade. Small but fast-growing. People were making money on conspiracy culture by the early 1990s. So now, that's what I'm talking about. Ian Carroll, Alex Jones, making millions, and not just them, making millions of dollars. They are part of a well-established culture going back more than 30 years. More than 30 years. Again, these ideas are not new. With sales of over 500,000 copies, The New World Order, 1991, by Pat Robertson, recognize that name, founder of the Christian Broadcasting Network, reveals that the New World Order, NWO, will eliminate America's sovereignty with the aid of UN troops. So this was in the Christian world as well. Pat Robertson. I remember vaguely Pat Robertson's name when I was very young, but again, growing up in a Jewish family and not really paying attention to right-wing or Christian politics, my associations with him are largely negative, but I believe it's possible that someone had mentioned his name. He was repentant recently and leading a church and had been greatly humbled by some experiences. I could be completely wrong about that, but Pat Robertson was a major Christian figure, for better or for worse. Continuing, an elite of godless conspirators is intent, this is Goodrick Clark, an elite of godless conspirators is intent on ruling the world, and computer technology and microchips are part of the New World Order NWO enslavement plan. So it mentions a bunch of names. Jack McLamb's Operation Vampire Killer. And the vampires are blood-sucking secret elites that are undermining the Constitution in order to rule over a racially mixed and docile society. That's Jack McLamb in his book Vampire Killer 2000. Other favorites were Gary Caw's En Route to Global Occupation, detailing the clandestine moves to suspend the Constitution and establish one world government, and Jeffrey Baker's Checkmate, The Game of Princes, giving extensive details of the plans of bankers, corporate leaders, and leading families to rule over a helot, Helot, it's a Roman word for slave, I believe, helot world. John Coleman's Conspirators Hierarchy, 1992, which was mentioned in my interview with Mike Williams about the Beatles. He mentioned that book. Documents the Committee of 300, a powerful group of international bankers, industrialists, and oil magnates intent on world control. Jim Keith's Secret and Suppressed, 1993, includes chapters on the Jonestown, Guyana massacre as a CIA mind control effort, on brain implants, AIDS, and on secrets from the Pentagon and the Vatican Library. Besides a battery of magazines, including the Free American, USA Patriot Magazine, Patriot Report, and Don McIlvaney's Intelligence Advisor, the conspiracy subculture communicated busily through the internet and on the airwaves of small independent shortwave and FM radio stations. That is Art Bell, who's not mentioned in here, but that's also the world that Alex Jones comes from. If you look at the very beginnings of Alex Jones, that's what he began. Small independent shortwave and FM radio. And to since become the host of and founder of InfoWars, which is a multi-million-dollar, or at least it was, I think it was before it was taken from him in a lawsuit, a multi-million-dollar operation. So this is the world that Alex Jones comes from. Everything that we're talking about here is where Alex Jones comes from. It mentions Anthony J. Hilder, a broadcaster with Radio Free World in Los Angeles. He says, Hilder mentions Adolf Hitler's call for, quote, one Reich, one people, one leader, end quote, as a precursor to the New World Order, just as the Wall Street bankers earlier financed both Nazism and Soviet communism. The elite's goal today is a totalitarian slave state of controlled citizens. And this is interesting, right? The elite Wall Street bankers financed both Nazism and Soviet communism against righteous, white men in America. But of course, the Nazis said that the elite bankers financed Soviet communism and Western capitalism, right? So, and perhaps the Soviets also said that the elite bankers are behind the Nazis and the Americans and the American capitalists. So it's interesting that everyone's pointing, and of course you can see that if everyone's pointing to the same sets of things, that people might say, oh, we should probably not be looking at each other. We should be looking at the elite bankers. Well, what do you think comes after that? The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So then it talks about Linda Thompson, her video, Waco, the Big Lie. She talked about black helicopters that hovered over her home and attacked her office with an ultrasonic weapon, debilitating her and her staff. And of course, if you follow the conspiracy world, you know about the black helicopters meme. So it says, continuing on 282, Timothy McVeigh read widely in patriot literature and was strongly influenced by its paranoid fantasies concerning federal government totalitarianism and a United Nations takeover. He was deeply preoccupied by the Waco siege and visited the site twice during and after the confrontation. According to witnesses, McVeigh repeatedly viewed the Thompson video about Waco and often talked about a revenge attack on a government building. It is highly significant that the Oklahoma City bombing was carried out on the exact anniversary of the Waco siege. McVeigh was also impressed by the nightmare vision of total citizen control in a satanic social system with the injection of numbers and the issue of barcodes to individuals. McVeigh even believed he was himself the victim of a mind control project, claiming that the federal government had earlier implanted a microchip in his buttocks to monitor and control him during Army service. According to the conspiracy theories, the bombing itself was an FBI crisis creation project to panic the population into further surrender to the government. So, pause. What these conspiracy mindset, what the belief always tries to do is to get individuals to buy into the idea that total war is being waged against them. And they, within these groups are all cultivated amongst themselves. You have to go and you have to deliver the first strike, and you will then ignite the revolution, right? And I'm very surprised that Nicholas Goodrick Clark doesn't talk about Timothy McVeigh's connection to the Turner Diaries by William Luther Pierce. I talked about that in my Christ Over All article. Timothy McVeigh gave out copies of the Turner Diaries by William Luther Pierce. He's shown up many times before. The Turner Diaries is this fever dream of conquest over Jewish elites and the mud people. William Luther Pierce turned it into a fiction book that outlines all of the things that people should do, right? And so those books inspire people to conduct first strike warfare because war is being waged against them, with the promise that you are going to be the one who starts the revolution, bro. And they never start the revolution. But then on the flip side, this is how the conspiracy world becomes self-sealing. On the flip side, right, like McVeigh believes he's the subject of the conspiracy, and so then he strikes out to try and start the revolution. The revolution fails. It doesn't start. It never starts. That goes all the way back to Ebola as well. The revolution fails to start, but then according to conspiracy theorists, the bombing itself was an FBI crisis creation project to panic the population into further surrender to the government. Right? So McVeigh is waging first strike warfare because he believes he's subject to a conspiracy. But then the conspiracy world says, no, McVeigh himself is the conspiracy to get people to surrender to the government. So which is it? Right? This is why the conspiracy world, when it fails to produce the intended outcomes, reshifts to re-embody and syncretize the narrative in a way that continues the mindset. And this is how it works. It's a the conspiracy worldview is totalizing. It takes you over. It changes the way that you see everything. And it is a prison that people get locked inside. And you're not allowed to leave the conspiracy mindset, because when you leave the conspiracy mindset, that's when you become one of them. Right? That's how you know that you are now one of the bad guys. You've left the conspiracy worldview, and now you've fallen asleep. You're one of the sheeple, like everybody else, right? And so there's massive social penalties around friend groups from like, no, I can't get that stuff it's tiring. It's tiring. And that's how it becomes a prison. The conspiracy is the first thing until the first thing doesn't work out. But then the conspiracy comes, well, the thing was never intended to work out in the first place. And that was the whole conspiracy. So it becomes self-sustaining. It becomes self-sealing. And there's no exit besides exiting from the entire worldview. Page 282, conspiracy theories have long prevailed on the radical right in America. Following the rediscovery of the notorious English conspiracy theorist Nesta Webster, 1876 to 1960. I've never actually heard that name until I read this book, so that would be interesting to go look into. The notorious English conspiracy theorist Nesta Webster, the John Birch Society and other right-wing groups identified European secret societies and Freemasonry in the 18th century as the ferment behind the French Revolution and subsequent challenges to traditional authority in modern times. At the center of these speculations were the Bavarian Illuminati, a secret society founded at Ingolstadt on 1st May 1776 by young Jesuit professor Adam Weishaupt, 1748 to 1830. The social vision of the founder was rational, egalitarian, and anti-clerical. By targeting existing Masonic lodges for penetration, the order successfully spread its revolutionary ideas through Germany, Austria, Italy, and into France. The Illuminati were dramatically exposed when the Bavarian authorities banned the order, and hundreds of papers and Weishaupt's letters were seized in 1786. A flood of confessions, self-justifications, and official protocols ensued. Once the French Revolution broke out, a mass of circumstantial evidence already existed to link this watershed event of European history with the activities of secret societies. Pause. If you ever read the book Libido Dominandi by E. Michael Jones, which he wrote in 1999 before he got into all the Jew stuff, and the opening chapter of that book talks about the Illuminati. That's chapter 1, where he begins his book about the sexual revolution. It's very, very interesting. I recommend the original edition, which has a black cover. This was, again, written in 1999. This is before E. Michael Jones became, more known for the things that he's known for now, particularly Jewish world conspiracy stuff. It's a great book. I reference it throughout my Exiting the New Age course because he talks about Wilhelm Reich, who's, I think, is an under-recognized figure in the sexual revolution today. But he opens the book talking about the influence of the Illuminati. Very informative. Continuing on 283, without the influence of Nesta Webster, it is likely that few Americans today would have heard of the Illuminati. Due to the republication of her books and the popularization of her ideas among the radical right, the Illuminati became a major theme of American conspiracy literature from the late 1960s onwards. Here, it is widely believed that the Illuminati had a major malign influence on the founders of the United States through Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Adams, who are alleged to have been members. Their influence is alleged to be visible in the occult symbols of the pyramid and eye on the reverse side of America's Great Seal and on the dollar bill, originally designed by the Founding Fathers. The Illuminati even entered popular culture through such underground classics as the Illuminatus Trilogy, 1975, and the Illuminati Papers, 1980, by Robert Anton Wilson, major New Age occult kind of writer. More perennialist, kind of philosophy guy in many ways. It's hard to characterize him. He's not strictly New Age. He's very occult and very mystical in a lot of his views. By the 1980s, the pre-revolutionary Illuminati of Bavaria had metamorphosed into supranational insiders bent on controlling all national money systems and governments. This is the strange contradiction that lives in a lot of the Patriot movement. Right, the idea that the Illuminati are behind all world events, and we'll get to David Icke and Bill Cooper talking about that in a minute. And they were behind the founding of the United States of America. So, is the United States of America the good guys or the bad guys if they're founded by the Illuminati? It's one of those tense contradictions in that world. Continuing, from the 1970s onwards, revelations about Jewish banking families, the American ruling class, and the secret goals of private and state agencies created a flood of books on conspiracy theory for right-wing fundamentalist readerships. Gary Allen's book, None Dare Call It Conspiracy, 1971, discussed the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, and the Federal Reserve banking system before pinpointing the Council on Foreign Relations, a private foreign policy think tank founded in 1921 as the prime mover for an unelected world government. Is this starting to sound familiar yet? The Council on Foreign Relations, the Illuminati, Adam Weishaupt, etc. Hopefully this is all starting to sound more than a little familiar. And so now's the point in the story where we get to Bill Cooper in his book, Behold a Pale Horse. So page 284. In the early 1990s, the doyen, which essentially means celebrated member of U.S. conspiracy cults, was Milton William Cooper of St. John's, Arizona, who wrote a compendium for the conspiracy millenarian movement with the apocalyptic title, Behold a Pale Horse. So then it talks about Bill Cooper being born. He was in the United States Air Force and in the Navy. He was on a submarine in the Pacific where he saw a flying saucer. And then he was in naval intelligence with high security clearance where he discovered the existence of a high-level conspiracy against the citizens of the United States. He was convinced that naval intelligence had participated in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And by 1972, he had amassed disturbing classified information on UFOs, the Navy, the secret government, the coming Ice Age, Project Galileo, and the plan for the New World Order. Honorably discharged in 1975. He tried to leak the information, and then there were alleged to be a couple of different murder attempts on him via car wrecks. While continuing to collect material, Cooper determined to expose the truth of this plan to enslave mankind in a new world order. This intention was realized by the publication of his book, described by Cooper as, quote, closer to that truth than anything previously written, end quote. Now I'm going to return to Goodrick Clark, quote, Behold a Pale Horse is a chaotic farrago of conspiracy myths interspersed with reprints of executive laws, official papers, reports, and other extraneous materials designed to show the looming prospect of a world government imposed on the American people against their wishes and in flagrant contempt of the Constitution. The first chapter comprises an allegedly secret government memorandum entitled Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. First discovered in an IBM copier at a surplus sale in July 1986, this document has become a hot favorite among the conspiracy cults. Here we learn that the elite decided in 1954 to exploit operations research, computer technology, and finance to model a wholly predictable and manipulable society in order to transfer wealth from the undisciplined and irresponsible many to the worthy and intelligent few. Inferior mass education would keep the people undisciplined and ignorant, while the trivial concerns of media and banal entertainments would render them confused, disorganized, and distracted. The piece is written in a technical jargon that likens social and economic engineering to electronics to suggest that all individuals in a society can ultimately be programmed for, quote, people who will not use their intelligence are no better than animals without intelligence. Such people are beasts of burden and stakes on the table by choice and consent, end quote. That last quote is from Bill Cooper. And, if you think this is some sort of innovative thing that he's discovered, you can go back and you can read the early science fiction, of Fahrenheit 451, and you could read Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and you can read 1984 by George Orwell, and you can see that, though at the time, Yuval Noah Harari, who said humans are hackable animals, and who works for the World Economic Forum with Klaus Schwab, you think, oh, wow, he's saying all these scary new ideas. He's not. Bill Cooper was talking about this in the early 1990s, and a lot of these early science fiction books were warning about this stuff in the 1950s. And so the idea that there's this Jewish conspiracy, going back to the protocols, I might add, which doesn't focus on technology quite so much, this Jewish conspiracy that's surfaced, it's like, no, these are really easy ideas to kind of figure out if you have a particular kind of mind. It's not difficult to think, well, if I were really bent on controlling the world, what would I do? And you can do that today, right? And so part of the mythology of the protocols is that it documents this meeting of 13 rabbis in some cemetery somewhere. It's a whole thing that they all meet and gather together to discuss their plot. And it must be authentic because who would come up with this stuff? It's not hard to come up with, especially when you learn that the protocols were forged from two different sources. There's a novel, Biarritz, which is, by a known fiction author. I don't remember the name of the author right now. And Maurice Joly, the dialogue of Machiavelli and Montesquieu in Hell. And so between Biarritz and the dialogue by Maurice Joly, you get the protocols that were all put together. And the authors, the forgers of the protocols, and the people later like, oh, this must be some Jewish conspiracy. Who could ever figure this out? The forgers found the people who had figured it out, and they figured it out in totally alternate fictional contexts, right? And so I could go into a long discussion about how the conspiracy theory then tries to say, well, actually Maurice Joly was a crypto Jew, and so was the author of Biarritz, and they're just disclosing their plots, and that's what's that conspiracy belief called? It's not limited hangout. Although it's parallel to revelation of the method. That's it. It's like, I have to tell you because they need your consent. This is how the conspiracy worldview becomes self-sealing. The explanation can't just be the explanation. There must be some deeper machinations behind it. If you find something that says this is actually what it says, is like, no, it's actually hiding and it's something else. So you can see all these ideas showing up in very, very early forms. I haven't looked into the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars copier document, but that might be a fun thing to do. So continuing on page 285, and now we're going to see a very important point. Quote, Bill Cooper identifies the document as a formal declaration of war by the Illuminati against the citizens of the United States. Now pay very close attention to what I'm about to say. Cooper asserts that peaceful citizens are justified in taking any measures, including violence, to identify, counterattack, and destroy the enemy. If war is being waged against you, you can wage war back. And you are justified in taking any measures, including violence, to identify, counterattack, and destroy the enemy. So because someone found a document in a copier, you now have the license to conduct warfare back. That is always the justification, including, again, for the protocols. That's why the book is called A Warrant for Genocide. Here's this document that purports to say this set of things. This document says war is being waged against you. You must wage war back, and you are justified in any actions you might take, including violence. That is entirely the point. That is entirely the danger of the conspiracy mindset that says you personally, and people like you, whether that is white people or Americans or patriots or whatever it is, are under attack. And you, because you are under attack, have license to do whatever you need to do to fight back, including violence. That is always the direction this goes. That is exactly the direction this goes. And that is why it is so dangerous. If you follow the conspiracy mindset all the way to the end of its logic, you will arrive at the following conclusion. You either must choose to act or not. That's it. That's it. Are you going to sit back and just let them do that to you? Or are you going to strike back? That's where the conspiracy mindset goes. That's its intention, is to drive you to a place where you feel justified in first strike violence. And that is 180 degrees in the opposite direction of Christianity. And everything that we've been talking about in all the chapters leading up to this is people who absorb this worldview, even though they didn't call it conspiracy at the time, whether it be Miguel Serrano or Savitri Devi or Leakin Rockwell, doesn't matter. They've all said that because war is being waged against us, we reject, this is the Nordic racial paganism chapter, we reject the faith that says we are not able to wage first strike warfare back. That's Evola as well. And so we reject Christianity and its calls to humility and repentance, and we are going to do this our own way. We are going to be a law unto ourselves, and Christianity must be thrown out. That was the Nordic racial paganism chapter. That's why it is the most recent chapter before this one. That's why it's the end of the logic. The end of the logic says you are justified in taking any actions in response to war being waged against you. That's where the rubber really hits the road. That's where the rubber really, really hits the road. I talked about this in my article, why the Jewish question is a Jesus question. If the villain bad guy is waging war against you, what are you going to do? Just going to sit there? Or are you going to take action against the guy who's ruining your life? Oh, you're going to say that you're a Christian now and suffering is redemptive and you're supposed to rejoice in all circumstances? You're weak. You're weak. You're meat. You're cattle. You're sheeple. Jesus called you sheep, and that's what you are. I'm going the other way. Bye. Right? That's where the conspiracy mindset leads. And that's why it's so dangerous. And that's why it has such a grip, particularly on young men who have been raised on it. Less so on women, but increasingly so. So that's why it gets a grip. Young men want to go to war. These ideas give them license to go to war. War is being waged on me. Dave's fault. I'm a crusader. I'm going to wage war back. Why? Because this document says war is being waged on me. That's where it always leads. Continuing. The second chapter, Secret Societies of the New World Order, represents Cooper's own investigations and reflections on the global plot against independence and liberty. The roots of the Illuminati conspiracy are traced to an ancient brotherhood of the snake and thence through the Templars and Freemasons. Cooper believes that most modern secret societies are really one society with a single purpose. A monolithic conspiracy to enslave mankind is masked by their apparent variety and plurality. This is a quote from Cooper. Check this out. The Order of the Quest, the Jason Society, the Roshiana, the Kabbalah, the Knights Templar, the Knights of Malta, the Knights of Columbus, the Jesuits, the Masons, the ancient and mystical Order of the Rosicrucis, the Illuminati, the Nazi Party, the Communist Party, the executive members of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Group, the Brotherhood of the Dragon, the Rosicrucians, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Trilateral Commission, the Bilderberg Group, the Vatican, the Russell Trust, the Skull and Bones, the Scroll and Key, the secret societies of Harvard and Yale universities. The Order, all the same, and work towards the same ultimate goal of a new world order. End quote. Cooper's obsessive analysis of these groups, both imaginary and real, piles detail upon detail to suggest the awesome power of interlocking elites across the world. Following Gary Allen's lead, pride of place is accorded to the Council on Foreign Relations in the Bilderberg Group. And then goes to Cooper. In his opinion, the most powerful secret organization in the world is the Bilderberg Group, whose three committees comprise members drawn from the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the Vatican, and the old aristocratic families of Europe. Quote, Cooper, these are the men who really rule the world, end quote. Cooper detects further Kabbalistic evidence of Illuminati influence on the foundation of the United States and the Great Seal. The all-seeing eye in the pyramid represents Lucifer and is also the ancient symbol of the Brotherhood of the Snake. The motto Novus Ordo Seclorum betrays the project of the Illuminati for a new world order. While the incidence of 13 and the number of leaves in the olive branches, the bars and stripes, the arrows and letters in E pluribus unum, the stars in the green crest, the stones of the pyramid, and the letters in Anuit Coptus indicate the signature of this most powerful of all secret societies. Cooper finds extensive evidence of the U.S. government's plans to impose totalitarian socialism and the abuse of presidential powers. He alleges that much legislation is introduced by the executive power through secret national security decision directives that are neither reported nor made available to the public. By means of these, quote, secret laws, the president, then George Bush, assumes the power to initiate covert actions, declare war, combat terrorism, and suspend the Constitution in a state of emergency without reference to Congress. Cooper passes on to the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, which in any national emergency is authorized to assume control of the media, food, energy, and transportation while mobilizing all citizens into work brigades under government supervision. End quote. Does that sound to you like anything you heard during COVID? From your friends, from right-wing conspiracy news sources, from memes you saw, from things that you had shared with you or that you shared? These ideas were not new. They came from Bill Cooper. I mean, not just him, but the worldview that he was a part of. So that all that stuff didn't just pop out of nowhere in 2020. It was all waiting. It was waiting for 30 years. In the book, Behold a Pale Horse, but the internet made it massively viral. And COVID provided the opportunity for everyone to become exposed to these conspiratorial ideas for the first time, right? And you're going to see the COVID's influence all over this. COVID was when everything collapsed and people started looking for alternate explanations for things. And so the explanation was already there. No one had to draft it. No one had to figure it out. Let's figure out what's going on. No, they turned to already existing work that had laid the groundwork. Bill Cooper, Behold a Pale Horse, and the conspiracy culture that had been around for more than 30 years at that point. None of this is new. Continuing on 287. The ruling elite believes that only covert and totalitarian government can solve the problems of the age. Apparently, their paramount concern is overpopulation. In order to control population growth, the U.S. government continues to wage war on its own citizens through the introduction of diseases, harmful chemicals, and radioactive substances among the population. The ruling elite specifically decided to target undesirable elements of society, including Negroes, Hispanics, and homosexuals. The smallpox vaccine was introduced to Africa in order to decimate the black population. The hepatitis B vaccine was used to infect the U.S. population. The AIDS virus is a government weapon. Tobacco fields are dusted with nuclear waste to induce lung cancer. Dioxin and other pollutants proliferate in the face of official denials. That's Goodrich-Clark. Important part about this is that this is actually in contradiction to the protocols or the worldview that stemmed from it. That the undesirables, the Negroes and the homosexuals, etc., their population is being massively increased in order to subvert the white race. Right? That's what the protocols or the extreme right-wing view says. So which is it? Is the government trying to suppress population growth through vaccines and other weapons because of overpopulation concerns, or are they trying to increase population growth? These are not compatible views. But again, this is how the conspiracy worldview adapts itself to the circumstances. If you adopt the presupposition that there must be a conspiracy going on, whatever the circumstances are, they will become the nature of the conspiracy. Oh, the conspiracy just changes. But you understand, like, they can't be suppressing population growth in the early 1990s and then exploding it later. That's not how population growth works, right? We're trying to decimate everybody. Or are you trying to decimate everyone in the 1990s? Or are you trying to foster population growth in the 1990s, right? Look at the curve, right? So there you go. Like, so this is, again, to justify we must be under attack from some centralized organization with the big plan behind it all. Oh, and these are the circumstances. Well, this must be what the plan is trying to do. Oh, these are the circumstances. Well, this is what the plan must be trying to do. The one thing that you can never do is question the idea of there being a plan at all. That you're not allowed to do once you're on the inside. Once you're on the inside of it, you're not allowed to question it or you're out, right? And so once you get in, it can be very difficult to leave, particularly if social relationships are built around it, and particularly if conspiracy beliefs are massively popular in the public imagination, as they are right now. As they are right now. And now I'm not denying that conspiracies exist. Obviously they do. They show up throughout Scripture. It's not too big of a leap to say that people with similar worldviews and similar motivations, including simple folly and sinfulness, work together for aims that they don't make public. I'm not saying that conspiracies don't exist. It's the grand unified theory that says every single world event is plotted and planned down to the last detail, by while allowing, for some amount of randomness by some centralized force that's the hidden hand guiding all of history. That's a very different level of conspiracy. To say that, a couple of these organizations work together and told lies in order to facilitate their agenda. Of course, like, those sorts of things happen. Jeffrey Epstein absolutely happened, and the people who participated with him participated in that. But to say that behind Jeffrey Epstein was this global world conspiracy, and then there was another conspiracy on the back half of that to suppress the conspiracy, to make sure that you don't learn about the conspiracy and the people in on that, it becomes self-sealing. And at what point are you going to exit from that? And are you going to say, look, these things are true, but I'm going to resist the urge to put everything into the hands of some all-powerful, all-controlling elite that are waging war against humanity? Because, as I said, once you begin believing that the elite are waging war against humanity, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? That's the pressure that the conspiracy worldview pushes people in, and that's what Bill Cooper talks about as well. So at some point, you just have to say, I'm out. I acknowledge the reality of these things, but I'm not going to investigate them with all my time because I got stuff to do. I've got things to do, and I'm not going to dive to the bottom of every single rabbit hole and succumb to despair. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to put my faith in Christ. Right? I mean, Christ says we battle not against flesh and blood, but spiritual wickedness in high places. So that itself validates the idea of there being a conspiracy. But it doesn't just leave you there. It leaves you with a way out. The good shepherd leads me beside still waters. All that peace that passes understanding. There's all kinds of evil and wickedness in the world. No one is denying that. But when it begins to become an all-consuming worldview that generates despair and hopelessness and cynicism and violence, that's where you got to say, yeah, I'm out, and take your chips and leave the table. Continuing on, 287. You're going to love this. UFOs and extraterrestrials play an apocalyptic part in William Cooper's conspiracy cult. Sound familiar? Alien spacecraft are alleged to have visited the United States with increasing frequency between 1947 and the end of 1952. Crashed UFOs, dead and live aliens, massive security blanket. Cooper appears to believe that the extraterrestrial humanoids came to Earth in search of genetic material to bolster their own declining species. If you throw out biblical theology, cosmology, and anthropology, you end up in some very weird places. If you ever want to make people really mad, start making the case that aliens are demons. And here's my case for that. Scripture says all things. Christ is Lord over all things, creator of all things. So that means if there are extraterrestrials, Christ created them too, right? Preach the gospel to them, evangelize them. Are they under the lordship of Christ? Do they need to repent? Yes or no? And there's no category for extraterrestrials in Scripture, by the way. They're supernatural beings for sure, but there's no category for extraterrestrials. And even if they are, they're under the lordship of Christ. So, if the UFO lands on the White House lawn, preach the gospel to them. Have you heard? Can I interest you in some information about our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ? Because he made you, right? And in him all things hold together. That includes you. The conspiracy folks who are into UFOs hate that. That drives them crazy. Okay. Continuing on 287, all covert state relations with the aliens are subject to a committee known as Majestic 12, whose secret briefings Cooper allegedly read as an intelligence officer with the U.S. Pacific Fleet in the early 1970s. Page 288. The ruling elite has secretly allied itself with extraterrestrials against the rest of the human population. Bill Cooper's millenarianism is quite literal. By the year 2000, this is all Goodrick Clark, by the year 2000, secret government measures against the people will escalate into overt hostilities. At the same time, the UFOs and extraterrestrial presence by the year 2000 will be officially revealed as a kind of second coming. A spacecraft called Galileo, presently on its way to Jupiter, will deliver a plutonium payload into the heart of the giant planet, generating an atomic reaction and the birth of a new star, which is to be called Lucifer. A massive program of media manipulation will interpret this phenomenon as a sign of immense religious significance. The whole world will expect the fulfillment of ancient prophecy. At this point, a vault containing the ancient records of Earth will be opened at the Great Pyramid of Cheops in Egypt, where George Bush will be president for an occult celebration of the millennium and proclamation of the New World Order. I missed that. If someone could send me when that happened, just a link to a video of it, that would be awesome. Continuing on. Bill Cooper is motivated by an anarcho-libertarian spirit of rebellion against a government he identifies as unconstitutional, criminal, and despotic. Pause. If they're waging war against you, you can wage war against them back. Always the same conclusion. The same applies to Anthony J. Hilder, Linda Thompson, and many other spokespersons of the U.S. conspiracy millenarian cults. Given that the cults frequently identify German National Socialism inter alia as a precursor of the New World Order, one may wonder what any of this has to do with esoteric Nazism. The answer lies in the cult's obsession with secrecy and conspiracy. By declaring war on a secret ruling elite that enslaves innocent people, the conspiracy theorists invoke a lethal projection. Let's read that again. By declaring war on a secret ruling elite that enslaves innocent people, the conspiracy theorists invoke a lethal projection. The elite is identified as totalitarian, anti-democratic, contemptuous of the people. The people are portrayed as helpless, unsuspecting victims of vicious plots, alien abductions, implantations, and all manner of personal violations. The accusation of such an awful occult tyranny vindicates a corresponding explosion of violence to demolish the massive edifice of lies, deception, and oppression. The accusation of such an awful occult tyranny vindicates a corresponding explosion of violence to demolish the massive edifice of lies, deception, and oppression. That is the direction the conspiracy mindset leads. That is the direction the protocols of the Elders of Zion lead. That is what we are seeing on the right wing today. An explosion of violence to demolish the massive edifice of lies, deception, and oppression. That is where it always leads, an explosion of violence. The formerly docile victims are justified in fighting and destroying the elite by any means necessary. Justified. Covert actions, violence, terrorism, all the means the elite stand accused of employing themselves are permitted to the victims as well, so they may exterminate the conspirators and recover their lost autonomy. Is this not sort of parallel to BLM and other organizations that believe in intersectionality and systemic oppression? We are the victims, therefore we get to do whatever we want. This is the exact same thing on the American right wing. The exact same thing. It's not new. 2002, this book was published. Cooper's book was published in 1990, I believe. The early 1990s, I believe they said. 1991. In fact, let's go look just to make sure. 1991. That's when Bill Cooper was writing this, 30 years before COVID. None of this is new. Continuing. I want to read that again. Covert actions, violence, terrorism, all the means the elite stand accused of employing themselves are permitted to the victims as well, so they may exterminate the conspirators and recover their lost autonomy. The close psychological parallels between the U.S. conspiracy cults and Nazi patterns of thought become obvious when one finds, here we go, when one finds that a complete reprint of the Protocols of the Wise Men of Zion forms the 15th chapter of Behold a Pale Horse. One of the founders of the conspiracy worldview, culture in the United States, the author of Behold a Pale Horse, Bill Cooper, includes a complete reprint of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in the 15th chapter of his book. So if you're involved in the conspiracy world, you might not have been exposed to Bill Cooper. You might have been, but you have been exposed to his ideas, and Bill Cooper thought the protocols were important enough to include in his book. The conspiracy world is founded on the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, because the real conspiracy thinking began in the United States in the late 80s, early 1990s. That's when it all began. That's what Goodrick Clark is documenting. And right there in the foundations, the protocols, in one of the seminal texts of conspiracy thought. That's right there at the end. The text is taken from the first English language edition translated by Victor E. Marsden, which was originally published by the Britain's Publishing Society, a notorious anti-Semitic group, in 1921. Although Cooper quotes Mayor Amschel Rothschild, 1743 to 1812, as saying, quote, "Give me control over a nation's currency and I do not care who makes its laws," he does not attribute the protocols exclusively to a Jewish world conspiracy. Cooper doesn't. He suggests that any reference to the, quote, Jews as the conspirators should be replaced with the word Illuminati, while the word Goyim, denoting the Gentile dupes and victims, should be read as cattle, the preferred term of contempt for honest but naive people. So Bill Cooper is like, no, it's not saying what it's actually saying. Like, even though the protocols is saying the wise men of Zion and the elders, and, they're talking about Jews and Goyim, that's not really what they meant. They really meant the Illuminati. Totally meant something different. It doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter. Still, he's like, well, when you read this, substitute something else. It doesn't matter. Thousands of copies of that book in circulation. Maybe people remember the disclaimer, maybe they don't. But, we're going to get further into this. Now this is an examination of the protocols. Despite their late 19th century prose, many of the protocols offer disturbing evidence of the conspiracy cultist fears and anxieties about secret government and the New World Order. The Jews, parentheses Illuminati, create ferments, discords, and hostilities between states to increase their indebtedness and provoke wars against their opponents. Protocol 7, hence constant minor wars since 1945. The Jews, parentheses Illuminati, aim to bewilder public opinion through contradiction. Protocol 5. The Jews, parentheses Illuminati, will distract the masses from their real objects with amusements, games, pastimes, passions, people's palaces. Protocol 13. These strategies reflect the artificial party politics and futile consumerism of the present. The Jews, parentheses Illuminati, will appoint a puppet ruler from among their slaves. He will have the right to propose emergency laws, to vary the Constitution, and declare a state of war. Protocol 10. Hence the national security decision directives and the mobilization of FEMA to establish a police state. The Jews, parentheses Illuminati, shall create an intensified centralization of government in order to control all mankind. Protocol 15. Hence the New World Order. So there's Bill Cooper at the foundations of the conspiracy world, the conspiracy cult, reprinting the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and using it entirely as the foundation of his worldview. He's only substituting the word Jews for the word Illuminati for the word Jews. That's it. That's all he's doing. Welcome to the conspiracy world. Do you absorb conspiracy content? Is that something that you enjoy as part of your regular diet of consumption? Guess what? You are drinking from the same poisoned well. Read the book. Read the book. 289. Conspiracy theories always flourish when people feel excluded from the political process. The worldwide growth of big government, the rise of a political class, and the widening gap between elites and electorates all work to stimulate conspiracy beliefs. The new American vogue in conspiracy beliefs rapidly found audiences in Europe due to the advancing integration of the European Union and its federal institutions in the 1990s. In particular, the, quote, alternative movement, with its suspicion of powerful government, big business, and orthodox medicine, has proved susceptible to conspiracy theories. The magazine Nexus, not to be confused with the Nexus of Kerry Bolton, which he mentioned earlier in the book, a major success on the New Age scene. New Age scene offers striking proof of this trend. Founded in Australia in 1990 and now commercially distributed in both the United States and Britain, it already claims a worldwide readership of more than 130,000. Nexus offers a fascinating mixture of, quote, prophecies, UFOs, Big Brother, the unexplained, suppressed technology, hidden history, and more, end quote. That's from Nexus. Articles on macrobiotic cooking, aromatherapy, and the ozone hole jostle with exposés on fluoride treatment of water, CIA mind control experiments, and pharmaceutical drug rackets. Here, it is already noticeable how alternative concerns with health, environment, and right livelihood are tinged with fears and anxieties about secret abuses and government plots. And I have a note here by that last paragraph I just read. It says, me. That was the world that I was in. I mean, I remember reading about all of this stuff in the New Age world, the alternative movement. Prophecies, UFOs, Big Brother, the unexplained, suppressed technology, hidden history, and more. Macrobiotic cooking, aromatherapy, ozone hole, fluoride treatment, mind control, pharmaceutical drugs. There's a quote, Linda Thompson, and Nexus distributed her video in Europe. But in June 1994, the magazine Nexus published an in-depth analysis of Linda Thompson's film and a prophetic review. Quote, this is Nexus. Quote, there is a very big underground movement building up in the United States at the moment. Every night somewhere in the USA, someone is showing this video to a bunch of friends. Nobody remains unaffected after seeing it. It is contagious, so beware, end quote. And that is exactly what Stone Choir said about their Big Lie video. The reason why I bring that up is because these tactics, like Europa, The Last Battle is another one. These tactics, this video, this piece of content is opening people's eyes. It's creating this underground movement. Those ideas are not new. Not new. The Waco siege, this is 1994 is when Nexus published this. 30 years ago is when Nexus published this. These pieces of content, of dubious sourcing, but, clear motivations of fomenting violence, right? That that war is being waged against you, lies are being told against you, and you need to rise up in the face of those lies, and you can take whatever action your conscience feels is justified in response to war being waged against you. Not new. Not new. I'm going to skip ahead because you're going to recognize the name I'm about to read. Page 290. In Britain, David Icke, the former professional soccer player and TV sports presenter, achieved star status in the New Age movement with the publication of his book, The Robots' Rebellion. Here he praised Nexus as incomparable and excellent for its provision of, quote, this is Icke, hard-to-get information on the transformative changes in society, end quote. Icke's book, The Robots' Rebellion, combines an anti-elitist, ecological, and spiritual gospel with the complete battery of far-right conspiracy theories and militia concerns, secret societies and Freemasons, banking and hidden elites, the New World Order, microchip mind control, extraterrestrials, and gun control. He also resurrected the protocols of the Elders of Zion with an extensive quotation of each protocol and a commentary on how its terrible plans have been realized in current political developments. Icke recognizes that Hitler used the protocols to incite anti-Semitism in Nazi Germany, but his belief in their authenticity is unassailable. Quote, Icke, just because Hitler used knowledge for negative reasons doesn't reflect on the knowledge itself, end quote. Does it not? Moreover, Icke notes the irony that, quote, Hitler and the Nazis were brought to power by the very Brotherhood plan which the protocols so powerfully predicted, end quote. So this is Icke saying, again, this is the conspiracy mindset, adapting to circumstances. No. The Nazis didn't use the protocols as their conspiracy justification. The Nazis themselves were the conspiracy, and the Nazis were described in the protocols. The conspiracy worldview just keeps right on trucking. It doesn't care. It doesn't care about facts. Everything must be explained within this totalizing worldview. Everything will be syncretized into it, and it can explain everything. Self-sealing is the term for that. It can't be falsified. Icke's speaking tours take him to all major UK cities. The book Robots' Rebellion went through its third reprint before it had been out a full year, and he appeared at the October 1994 Nexus conference in Amsterdam, which also featured militia leader Linda Thompson. So, like I said at the start, if you are into the conspiracy world, at the foundations of that world, Bill Cooper, David Icke, both of whom explicitly reference the protocols by name. By name. Bill Cooper says they're not talking, it's not Jews, it's Illuminati. And David Icke says just because the protocols was used for evil, and it was, doesn't mean the protocols is false. Now, if you go back, you may remember That if Bill Cooper is saying war is being waged against you, your conscience should allow you to do whatever you need in response to that war, right? David Icke is saying, no, you can't do that, right? So there's a disagreement there, but there's the tension is very important, because David Icke says just because the knowledge is used badly doesn't invalidate the knowledge, but everyone who gets exposed to this knowledge does bad things with it. David Icke doesn't seem to want to realize that, or perhaps today he does. Hopefully he does. I would love for him to comment on this. I wonder what he would say. Oh, another conspiracy guy who's now very popular, Russell Brand, marketing himself as a Christian now. And his thing is all about conspiracy, all about waking up from the matrix and the control system, I think is what he calls it. Same deal. Same deal. He didn't even drop that when he became a Christian either. You should see the Christians line up to defend him whenever you challenge him on his disastrously poor understanding of New Age of Christian doctrine, filtered through New Age mindset. People have said to me for a long time, give him time. He's had time. He's had time now. He's publishing a book with Tucker Carlson. I wonder what we're going to read in that book. I wonder if I stack it up next to John Mark Comer, what I'm going to see. Continuing on 291. While preaching a spiritual message of global love and enlightenment, The Robots' Rebellion, Icke's book, repeats the familiar beliefs and paranoid cliches of U.S. conspiracy cults. The American Federal Reserve was a creation of the Illuminati. The Brotherhood Elite, Icke's alternative term for the Illuminati, includes the Rothschild and Rockefeller empires. It has 6 front organizations, namely the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, the Bilderberg Group, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, and the United Nations. The aim of the Illuminati is the introduction, in the United Nations, Alice Bailey. Look up my Exiting the New Age course, willspencer.co/exit, and you can see how deep Helena Blavatsky, Annie Besant, and Alice Bailey were in the formation and support of the New Age. The United Nations. Alice Bailey, Lucis Trust, Lucifer Publishing, huge part of the UN. Are you saying, is the idea that these are Jews as well, right? What's going on? Because they definitely weren't. Bailey, Blavatsky, and Besant? Definitely not. Returning, the aim of the Illuminati is the introduction of a world government to which every continent would be subject. John F. Kennedy was assassinated because he opposed the Brotherhood's critical interests, the CIA, the Federal Reserve, and the Vietnam War. The American Gun Control Act of 1968 is word for word the Nazi Gun Control Law of 1938. Humans are to be barcoded in order to be, quote, read at supermarkets and banks. There are passages on FEMA, MJTF, I don't know what that is, FinCEN, the Financial Crimes Network, and the role of extraterrestrials. Icke quarries much of his material on the New World Order from Bill Cooper and expressly acknowledges Behold a Pale Horse as a source. So David Icke cites Bill Cooper. Bill Cooper republished the protocols in whole in Behold a Pale Horse. Are you listening, conspiracy fans? It is clear from Icke's book that he is a transmitter of this information rather than its originator. Throughout the process of a spiritual awakening, Icke feels, quote, this is Icke, he is being guided to an area of knowledge that needs to be made public, end quote. Or continuing the quote, those on the higher levels who are guiding me wanted this information put in the book and made available to the public, end quote. That's Icke. Now back to Goodrick Clark, who is then guiding Icke and his New Age followers towards the belief of the millenarian conspiracy cults. How does Icke come to be quoting extensive excerpts from Bill Cooper and U.S. militia sources? Who are the people who put this information into his hands? Recent investigations by Matthew Kalman and John Murray of Open Eye magazine suggest that far-right and neo-Nazi groups are pursuing a strategy of entryism by targeting the credulous Icke for the dissemination of their own ideas within the green and New Age milieus. Entryism is just to get a foot in the door. Whatever you can do to just establish the tiniest bit of credibility, just wedge your way in, force your way in. Entryism has been done against the Reform community, and it was successful. But going back, far-right and neo-Nazi groups have been pursuing the strategy of entryism through David Icke. Now we're going to see. The quote, Goodrick Clark, 292, the London-based New Age magazine Rainbow Arc maintains a close and influential relationship with Icke. It has printed conspiracy excerpts from Icke and also helped organize his lectures and meetings. The magazine also betrays a surprising range of far-right supporters and links. These include its former landlord, Mary Stanton, a British Israelite. British Israelites is that the Brits are the real Israel and the Jews are not. Anthony Shavas, a promoter of C.H. Douglas's social credit movement, and Donald Martin, the anti-Semitic publisher of Bloomfield Books and leader of the British League of Rights. Martin has a long record of running ultra-right groups, including the British Federation for European Freedom and the UK arm of the World Anti-Communist League. British National Party leader John Tyndall regards Martin and his organizations as allies in opposing the immigration of alien peoples, and Martin is published in Tyndall's magazine Spearhead. The editor of Rainbow Arc has steered Icke toward meetings with militant U.S. patriots, organized public meetings on conspiracy theories and rebellion, and recommended Bloomfield Books for information. The same editor has also boasted of their manipulation of Icke's interests. Quote, Icke's not ready for this yet, end quote. He commented on a spoof document entitled Further Protocols with outlandish plans of, quote, secret Zionism for the, quote, Goyim. The editor of Rainbow Arc said that Icke's not ready for the further protocols. Continuing with Goodrick Clark, the far-right links of Nexus have been exposed in Australia in the wake of its articles on the U.S. militias. Formerly a green alternative magazine with an interest in New Age health and third world issues, Nexus took up the present line under its new editor, Duncan M. Rhodes. Rhodes visited Gaddafi in Libya in 1989 and is a close friend of the right-wing Libya file, Robert Pash, a convert to Islam. Pash has tried to forge a link between the extreme right and left in Australia. Islam. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The enemy of the Jews, the Muslims, is my friend. The Jews and Muslims are enemies. Well, if I hate the Jews, then the Muslims must be my friend. And we are seeing that today, yesterday. Tucker Carlson, what the elites don't want you to know is that Muslims love Jesus. You know who doesn't love Jesus? The Jews don't love Jesus. Christians love Jesus. The Muslims love Jesus. The Jews don't. Christians and Muslims should ally with each other against the Jews. Don't believe me? Let's keep reading. Bottom of 292. Among Pash's other introductions to Libya is John Bennett, historical revisionist and president of the Australian Civil Liberties Union. Bennett is an associate of David Irving and Willis Carto. He serves on the editorial committee of the Journal of Historical Review, which is concerned with Holocaust denial. Nexus's British agent is also a devotee of the Protocols, an admirer of David Irving, and he denies the existence of gas chambers in Auschwitz. The impact of American conspiracy beliefs has been even more dramatic in Germany, where the Protocols enter a discourse of Nazi occult societies, extraterrestrial aliens, and time travel. We've been talking about that for weeks. In 1993, Jan van Helsing, aka John Udo Holy, published, and I'm gonna butcher this German just because it seems like a fun thing to do, Geheimgesellschaften und der Macht im 2020 Jahrhundert. Secret Societies and Their Power in the 20th Century. I'm sorry to all the Germans, I had to try. Anyway, this is all talking about massive bestseller, that book, Secret Societies and Their Power in the 20th Century, sold over 100,000 copies. Jan van Helsing sets out to expose the bloodsuckers behind the scenes. He identifies these archenemies of mankind as the Illuminati, a secret worldwide lodge which oppresses states and ordinary people through wars and economic enslavement. However, Helsing's apparent concern for humanity and New Age ethos mask anti-Semitic motives. This is the Entryism. My concern is just for humanity, right? And they push into New Age communities, which is open to these ideas of world conspiracy, and they penetrate all the way to David Icke. But the reason why they're successful with David Icke, because David Icke is drawing from Bill Cooper, and Bill Cooper put the Protocols in Behold a Pale Horse. This is all the roots of the conspiracy world. If you want to go all the way back to the beginning of the conspiracy movement in the United States, you will end up at Bill Cooper. That's the root. That's the foundation that all the flowers, that all the tree grew from. Everyone's got to cite him. Everyone's got to cite him because he, in 1991, is where it all came from. There is no road through the conspiracy world in America, particularly, that does not end up with Bill Cooper, and Bill Cooper put the Protocols in chapter 15 of Behold a Pale Horse. Okay, 293. Helsing, or John Udo Holy, traces the origin of the conspiracy against mankind back to 300,000 BC. 300,000 BC, when a Brotherhood of the Snake arose in Mesopotamia. High initiates first appeared in Germany during the 14th century when they were known as Illuminati. 300,000 years later, There's like a most epic yada yada yada. 300,000 years, this is the Brotherhood of the Snake, and then 300,000 years later, you get the initiates and in Germany in the 14th century. Helsing finds the modern root of the conspiracy in 1773 when Meyer Amschel Rothschild met 12 wealthy Jews, aka the Elders of Zion, at a secret meeting in Frankfurt. Here they devised a plan to control the wealth of the entire wealth of the world. Helsing then reprints the protocols of the Elders of Zion with extensive reference to Bill Cooper's comments on their current plausibility. The Rothschild Bank commissioned, quote, the Bavarian Jew Adam Weishaupt to found the secret order of the Bavarian Illuminati, which taught, quote, the New Testament of Satan, end quote, and swiftly recruited leading figures in finance and industry. As the sworn enemies of monarchy and the church, the Illuminati made a pact with the Freemasons to work for a, quote, New World Order through the American and French revolutions. The First World War was engineered to bring Russia under Illuminati control. The Second World War exploited, quote, differences of opinion between German nationalists and political Zionists, end quote, to expand the Russian sphere of influence and legitimize the state of Israel. The Third World War will lead mankind to embrace, quote, the Luciferic doctrine, end quote. This is all Van Helsing. Helsing's breathless survey of Illuminati progress through the ages is extensively sourced from Gary Allen, Des Griffin, and Anthony C. Sutton. Short chapters on Freemasonry in America, the City of London, the Russian Revolution, and the Federal Reserve pile up alarming details of Jewish ownership and control behind the scenes. Zionism calls the tune to which the powers dance. The Rothschilds were behind the British Declaration in support of a national Jewish home and the United States' entry into the First World War. The Rothschilds were behind the British Declaration in support of a national Jewish home and the United States' entry in the First World War. Zionism, the Jews, the Elders of Zion are manipulating world politics for their ends, is what that's saying. In 1999, Rothschild agents Colonel House and Bernard Baruch attended the Versailles Peace Conference, which gave birth to the Rockefeller-controlled Council on Foreign Relations. Quote, this is Van Helsing, the most influential background organization in the USA today, end quote. During the 1920s, the Dawes and Young plans were instituted by Jewish and American interests to facilitate German reparations, but their monopoly capital only served to build up the German arms industry. Despite his confused account, Helsing reassures the readers that, quote, everything was planned down to the last detail, but only the insiders knew, end quote. That's Van Helsing. The conspiracy worldview is totalizing. They must be in control of everything. They must be in control of every little detail. And when something doesn't pan out as they planned, how it does pan out was ultimately the conspiracy's goal all along. Superhuman abilities, superhuman, supernatural abilities, no matter what happens in world events, for good or ill. If a good thing happens, well, that's just the conspiracy giving you that good thing, so you won't ask questions. If a bad thing happens, then it's like, oh, it's the conspiracy. They're really taking control now. It's a totalizing worldview. It encompasses everything, and there's no room for providence. There's no room for God's sovereign hand over any of it, for God's intervention in ways great or small. It all must proceed according to this conspirator's plan for global world domination. God is sovereign over all of it. He put what's the verse? He brings the plan. God brings the plans of the nations to nothing, but they don't believe that. They threw out their only hope. Their only hope they threw out. Why? Because they want the consent of their conscience to commit violence. Because they don't want to repent. Because they want to be a law unto themselves. When you throw out biblical cosmology, theology, and anthropology, you end up at some very dark places. It is not a pleasant or pleasing place to be. It's totalizing. And as I talk about in my Exiting the New Age course, and there's a chapter on apologetics, these worldviews, they don't produce children. Why would you have a kid in this view? It's all this one world conspiracy leading towards, global tyranny. Why have a child? Why have a child? There's always information to be found, which is very different from building a life and getting and building comfort and security that you can raise a family in. These beliefs, it's a death cult. It is absolutely a death cult. And, in the Exiting the New Age course, I talk about that in chapter 14, the apologetics section. It produces seekers, not mothers and fathers. I have a whole section about that. Continuing on. Turning to National Socialism in the Third Reich, Helsing borrows heavily from Jürgen Rathover's Das Vril project, with its fantastic account of links between the Thule Society, the Vril Society, and extraterrestrial intelligences. Sabotendorf learned from the Gnostic Marcionite Templars that a world transformation was imminent according to the movement of the zodiac around the Black Sun. The kingdom of God would be taken from the Jews and given to the Germans. This is Sabotendorf. According to the Thule Society, the Old Testament God El Shaddai commanded the Jews to, quote, make hell on earth, end quote, Gnosticism, which is why the world was always consumed by war and conflict. The Thule Society, Helsing claims, knew all about the Jewish world conspiracy and the protocols. The Thule Society was a precursor, I believe, to the Nazi Party or the SA and the SS. I can't remember which one. Helsing, as the forerunner of the Nazi Party and the SS, it's both. There it is. Sorry. The Thule pledged itself to fighting Jewish banks and lodges and creating a, quote, realm of light on earth, end quote. According to the Babylonian revelation of Isaias, Thule initiates believed in the coming of Messiah, the, quote, third Sargon who would restore Germany to greatness with new Aryan culture. Helsing adds further colorful passages on Hitler's search for the subterranean realm of Agartha, as I've been saying, in order to make contact with the heirs of the Aryan aliens from Aldebaran, Hyperborea. I've been saying it, Agartha and Hyperborea, where all that come from, that you're seeing in the memes, where it all come from. This is where it all come from. Helsing expands on Karl Haushofer's links with Tibet before claiming that the SS and its inner Black Sun Circle was a religious order dedicated to the practical realization of the Thule Society's esoteric ideas. Quote, Helsing, countless young men were trained by the Black Sun at the Wewelsburg and sent to Tibet, where they are preparing for Armageddon at the end of the century, end quote. Missed that. Because I think, wasn't Bill Cooper talking about the aliens landing in 2000 and the Great Pyramid of Cheops and all kinds of crazy stuff? People had some crazy expectations for 2000. At this point, Helsing dilates on the Vril Society's telepathic contacts with the aliens in the solar system of Aldebaran, 68 light-years distant from the Earth in the constellation of Taurus. The extraterrestrials reveal that their master race of fair god-men began colonizing other planetary systems over 500 million years ago. Within our own system, they settled on Malona, now forming the asteroid belt, Mars, as evidenced by the Great Pyramids and the face at Cydonia, that's a whole other conversation, and on Earth in Mesopotamia, where they formed the ruling caste of the Sumerians. Similarities between the Aldebaran, Sumerian, and German languages attest to the extraterrestrial origins of the Aryan Germans. Aided by the Aldebarans, the Vril Society built a time machine on anti-gravitational principles. This technology led to the amazing German flying saucers of the Haunebu and Vril classes built under SS auspices. Wilhelm Landig, Nazi mysteries we talked about in the previous chapter. Helsing reproduces familiar neo-Nazi material about the 1933 Jewish declaration of war on Germany, Polish provocations, and the Morgenthau plan to pastoralize a defeated Germany. He alleges that German and Japanese offers of peace were systematically ignored so that both countries could be reduced to rubble. That's during World War II. We've heard that before. Tucker Carlson is talking about the atomic bomb being unnecessary. Right? That's Tucker Carlson. That was a whole big thing. Someone told me about that. I was like, what? He's talking about that? He talked about it with Doug Wilson at Man Rampant, that he regards the beginning of all this being the atomic bomb. Right? Crazy. The resulting destruction created enormous investment opportunities, and global reorganization signposted the New World Order. Helsing's account of Germany's post-war experience in this process of internationalization is strongly nationalist. Under the guise of democracy and liberalism, the Illuminati planned the denationalization and moral degradation of Germany. Post-war, quote, re-education, democratic and liberal instruction, to denazify German attitudes and institutions, defamed a parental generation, encouraged youth revolt, and fostered moral relativism. Egoism, consumerism, and the neglect of history in the school curriculum has created a German youth ignorant of their past. There's Trash World again. Page after page addresses controlled media, newspapers, and parapsychological methods of indoctrinating civilian populations. Helsing supplies membership lists of key Illuminati organizations, including the Committee of 300, Council on Foreign Relations, Skull and Bones, the Round Table, the Bilderbergs, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, and the United Nations Organization, UNO. At their apex stands the Rothschild family. Skipping ahead, 296. In 1995, Helsing published Geheimgesellschaften, probably secret society. 2, in the form of extended responses to interview questions. Here he denies the charge of anti-Semitism, claiming Jewish friends and colleagues, before making the disingenuous distinction between Semitic Hebrews and Ashkenazi Jews, or Khazars, who are his real antagonists in the persons of the Rothschilds, Warburgs, the English royal family, ! Marx, Lenin, Stalin, etc. Joel Webbon talking about exactly this on his podcast. You think he didn't invent this stuff? As I've been saying over and over again, no one came up with this stuff. These ideas have been around for a long time, longer than anyone in the Christian nationalist world or the Reform world or whatever world you're in, whether it be Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, whatever. If you're listening to this when you were a kid or not even born yet, these ideas were percolating by the hundreds of thousands in terms of published books in the underground of American conspiracy culture. The COVID era opened the doors to all of it. It flooded into American culture, particularly into the right. Young men were discipled in it, raised in it, and now they are embodying it. And this is their worldview, or various forms of it. This is exactly what's going on. And now you have major influencers like Tucker Carlson and Joel Webbon and Ian Carroll, not to mention David Icke and others, Russell Brand, Andrew Tate, broadcasting this to millions around the world. They did not come up with these ideas. They were fed these ideas. They didn't ask questions where these ideas came from. That's why I'm doing this, so that you know where these ideas came from. Read the book, Disingenuous Distinction Between Semitic Hebrews and Ashkenazi Jews, or Khazars. They're real antagonists in the form of the English royal family. The English royal family are Jews too. Crazy. That's even Goodrich Clark puts an exclamation point by that. This ploy recapitulates the progressive disqualification of Jews from their Israelite heritage and the Christian identity doctrine. He then reprints several pages of Dr. Johannes Pohl's vicious translation of the Talmud that was published by the Nazi Party in 1943 as anti-Semitic propaganda. On the protocols, Helsing simply denies that their authenticity is an important issue. They exist and they are being applied. To complete his anti-Jewish rotomontade, I don't even know what that word is, he reveals that former Chancellor Helmut Kohl was born Heinrich Kohn, and shows how George Soros is running East European economies through his liberal economic writ. Helsing's dubious sources, his constant repetition of Jewish names as members of private and public organizations, and above all his emphasis on the assets and power-broking influence of the Rothschilds as the top Illuminati family, leave no doubt that his conspiracy theories are aimed at Jewish targets. Always. Even if they say otherwise. They make it very, very clear. They make it very, very clear. Page 297. Oh, sorry. Bottom of 296. Helsing copies Bill Cooper's account of how the AIDS virus was artificially produced at Fort Detrick, Maryland. The virus was introduced to the African population under cover of a WHO pox vaccination program in 1977 before being used to target, quote, undesirable groups in the United States, such as blacks, Hispanics, and homosexuals from 1978 onwards. Helsing knows Bill Cooper personally and also reprints his entire account of Majestic 12 material and secret U.S. government treaties with evil aliens. From time to time, UFO stuff will surface massively in the public dialogue, particularly on X. A lot of it ties back to this as well. Again, Bill Cooper. It's all there, all very old. The CFR and Trilateral Commission have complete control over alien technology as well as the economy. This joint human-alien power structure aims at the enslavement of the human race. Helsing's Illuminati Jewish world conspiracies extensively borrowed from the American Patriot movement, but is applied to German nationalist concerns. He argues that this cosmic plot can be foiled only by a restoration of the German Reich. Helsing quotes Mattern and Landig's accounts of the Antarctic, quote, phantom convoy, and the fruitless American attempts to subdue the Germans on Antarctica in 1947 and 1958. Helsing repeats the neo-Nazi adage that the German Reich did not capitulate, but only the German armed forces under Grand Admiral Donitz. The German Reich is still legally in existence, and the present regimes of Poland, Austria, and the German Federal Republic are merely provisional governments. The German Reich presently controls huge areas of sovereign territory in Antarctica and the San Carlos de Bariloche province of Argentina, which I've been to. That was like my second stop on the world tour. I left from Buenos Aires. I took a bus down to Bariloche. It was like day 7 on my years abroad. And then I only found out later that it was like a huge popular place for Nazis that had escaped Germany. And looking back on my time in Bariloche, I kind of understand why. It looks quite a lot like parts of Germany. It's very, very beautiful. Lakes and forests and stuff. It's very nice. If I remember, I'll make a note. Maybe I'll put a couple photos of Bariloche in Argentina in this video. In all, this is Helsing. Oh no, Helsing also claims contacts with members of the Black Sun. One such interviewee was allegedly born in New Schwabenland and lives today with 3 million other Reich Germans in the subterranean city. People are reading this and believing this. Further bases exist on the Canaries and the Bermuda Triangle and in the Himalayas. In all, the Reich Germans today have a standing army of 6 million soldiers, including immigrant Aldebarans and an armada of 22,000 flying saucers. This, quote, third power may prove mankind's only defense against Illuminati enslavement. This is lunacy. This is utter lunacy. And people were reading this and being like, yeah, bro, totally. 6 million in the standing army of the Reich Germans and 22,000 flying saucers. Let's go. Sorry, bro. I don't know what to tell you. Continuing on 297, Helsing regards the United Nations intervention in Iraq and the ensuing Gulf War as another major instance of the Illuminati offensive against any remaining opposition to its New World Order. As, quote, the Germans of the Orient. The Iraqis are long-standing allies of the German Reich. I want you to put Iran in your mind right now. I'm going to keep reading. Put that in your mind. It is no accident that Helsing should admire fundamentalists and pariah states that pursue the politics of identity with ethnic cleansing against national minorities, e.g. Iraq and Serbia, as these states have no stake in the global economic order of liberal capitalist states under American hegemony. In fact, Helsing praises Iraq for its educational, welfare provision, and other achievements under a, quote, fascist social system. Iraq is a major regional power, exposing a major threat to Illuminati goals in the Middle East. Helsing extols Saddam Hussein as the, quote, new Hitler, who is far more beloved by his people than any career politician in the democracies. So this is the early 1990s. Fast forward 30 years with Trump and these strikes in Iran. And what do you have? You have Alexander Dugin, this Russian writer, theorist, political influencer, whatever he is, talking about we need to support Iran. Why? Because Iran hates Israel. Israel is the Jews. The Jews are behind all world conspiracy. We need to support Iran. That's why they say these things. That's why Tucker's praising the Muslims. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's not new. They were praising Saddam Hussein in Iraq 30 years ago for the same reasons. It doesn't change. None of this is new. It's the same pattern. It's the same ideas over and over and over again, just with more memes, more colors on the internet, more headlines. Same worldview from 30 years ago, transposed from Iraq to Iran. Same enemies. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Helsing 298. Helsing presents anti-Semitism and German nationalism within a wholly novel discourse of aliens, free energy, time travel, and New Age religion. Scrolling down to the bottom, because then he talks about the Philadelphia experiment, which is too much to get into right now. At the bottom of 298, by presenting secret societies and Jewish world conspiracy as an extraterrestrial struggle, Aldebaran, over the destiny of our planet, Helsing succeeds in reaching a New Age readership with his Manichaean anti-Semitism. Manichaeanism, you've heard me talk about that. Global eternal struggle of light and dark. The white races, whatever Helsing's a fan of, the Germans are locked in an eternal struggle with the Jews as embodying all darkness. Same thing. We saw it in Evola. We saw it in Serrano. We saw it in Savitri Devi. We've seen more names than I can count. Francis Parker Yockey. Same stuff. Exactly the same. For example, more than 60 new esoteric conspiracy titles appeared in Austrian bookshops, 60 during the first quarter of 1995 alone. The success of his conspiracy books also coincides with a widespread reaction among many Austrians against the European Union since the country joined the EU in 1992. As in the case of the U.S. Patriot Movement, bigger government and foreign interference greatly increased the demand for conspiracy theory. Bigger government, foreign interference, COVID, greatly increased the demand for conspiracy theory. Now here we are. All right, 299. We're getting very close. We have like 3 pages left, I think. Yeah. The endemic spread of conspiracy theories in the New Age milieu is a disturbing phenomenon. an anarcho-libertarian interest in tracing CIA mind control experiments, federal government covert operations, and links with UFOs and aliens could suddenly switch into a pessimistic discourse of hidden elites, the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, the Bilderbergs and Rothschilds, leading to reprints of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. It's on every single page in this chapter. How can one explain the drift from an open, anti-authoritarian, egalitarian outlook to an anxious myth of hostile elites and hidden threats? Some New Agers may well feel contempt for a society that has failed to transform itself spiritually in line with their aspirations in the 1970s. This is talking about the old New Age heads. At that time, the secular social critique was Marxist, with rational explanations of capital concentration and corporate power. New Agers eschewed this in favor of inner transformation. But now, after Thatcher, Reagan, and Bush, many may wonder what is holding up the arrival of the New Age. The pressures of globalization and automation, the escalating export of jobs, the backlash against affirmative action, and political correctness all evidence a growing strain on the middle classes. Spiritual fixes via candle burning, tarot, runes, and druid workshops to calm the inner world can easily mix with, quote, anti-fantasies about what, or more often, you-know-who, is spoiling things out there. This sounds familiar. This explains a lot of what I saw. Why is the New Age not coming? Why is it not coming about? Why is the world not transforming? Why is it getting, more government, more interference? Oh, what's causing all of this? Oh, who's causing all this? Oh, Bill Cooper, protocols, Illuminati? No, it's the Jews. Right? The compatibility of conspiracy theories with New Age ideas is not new. Page 299, bottom. Here we go. The Volkish racist movement and Wandervogel groups of interwar Germany mixed nature worship and ecological and health issues with anti-Semitism, racism, and national revival. Volkism. This is being talked about by many within the Christian nationalist world, including Stephen Wolfe. I believe C.J. Engel and Andrew Isker are talking about it as well. The idea of Volkism is very popular. Are we going to talk about the Wandervogel, like the Wandervogel groups? Mix it, and this is also in the conversation about with Nordic racial paganism. The idea of Carl Jung spotting this in 1913, nature worship and ecological and health issues with anti-Semitism, racism, and national revival. That's Volkism that spread directly into the formation of national socialism. Major contributing streams, one of the major contributing streams, and guess what? We return to Mark Musser and his book Nazi Ecology. Here it is, once again. Recommended. Today, many New Age groups rehearse the nativist aspects of Volkish thought and a eulogy of the primitive. Native Americans, African Bushmen, and Australian Aborigines are credited with a natural wisdom long lost among the rational, technologically advanced peoples of the West. As long as the idealized groups were perceived as marginal, foreign, or oppressed, such New Age sentiment was generally left-wing or liberal. However, once the models were sought closer to home in the pre-rational mythical past of Western culture, Volkish ideas could make a fashionable return. Again, I talk about this in my Exiting the New Age course as well, the way the New Age syncretizes, Polynesian culture, African Aboriginal, Native American. It syncretizes all of this. And so now, though I wouldn't call the burgeoning right-wing movement itself New Age, this celebration of the primitive now being restored, recovered, rediscovered by white people or people that are fond of their European heritage, you see the same thing. And I have up on my shelf, you can't see it, but it's just out of frame, I have The Archaic Revival by Terence McKenna. That's another one. Early 1990s, The Archaic Revival. What does that mean? We're going to a techno primitivism, primitive ways of being fused with technology. That was Terence McKenna in the 1990s, saying that's what fueled a lot of the New Age movement. A lot of discussions in like the year 2000, 2001, when I was big into the rave scene, the very, very beginning of all that. Terence McKenna was a huge part of that. I'm pretty sure Joe Rogan has mentioned Terence McKenna. He shows up in a lot of like audio edits and stuff like that. He talked about mushrooms, and he called the ayahuasca use a drug cult, one of the most popular drug cults in the world, I think he said, in the 1970s. So it's that same kind of return to this localism, which rejects sort of more modern ideas, which are applied to be Jewish via the protocols. And so we have to take out the architects of modernism that are trying to suppress us racially. That's what this is saying. In the New Age movement, numerous groups and workshops are now devoted to reviving the lore of the ancient Celts and Teutons. Books on Ogham, Ogham, I have no idea what that is, runes, prophecy, and pagan gods proliferate. Shamanism, magic, and superstition are in. Nostalgia for a lost golden age and apocalyptic hopes of its revival recall the ideological foreground of earlier demands for fascist renewal. So this is, again, what Goodrick Clark is saying is this Volkism, right? This, what is he, nativism. This is left-wing New Age kind of fixation on tribal cultures around the world is now being applied in a more right-wing German Volkish kind of view, and it's the same pattern. Modernity must fall in a cataclysm of violence so we can return to our nativist roots. And who are the architects of modernity? The Jews through the protocols. Continuing on 300, 2 pages left. The U.S. militias, conspiracy cults, and New Age cultural pessimism represent varied strands of popular radicalism that are deeply hostile towards liberalism in modern politics and society. Some New Age ideas eulogize nature and primitive peoples in a gilded vision of the ancient past, while environmental extremists question the value of human civilization. And that's Mark Musser, Nazi Ecology, once again, that the left-wing environmentalist movement finds its roots in Nazi and pre-Nazi thought around with Volkism. That's the whole book. That's the whole interview, that the left-wing environmental ecological movement does not want to admit that a lot of its views came directly out of the Nazi era. That's the thesis of the entire book. Let me read the back for you again. Nazi Ecology deconstructs the anti-Semitic historical background of the early German Green movement of the 19th century that was absorbed by National Socialism. While many have decried the industrial nature of the Holocaust, such views cannot explain the motive behind the greatest crime of the 20th century. Nazi racism was foreshadowed by the social Darwinism of German Romanticism in the 1800s that laid the ecological foundations for what is otherwise known today as environmentalism. Nazi Ecology explains why the Holocaust is best understood as a modernized form of human sacrifice carried out under biological ecological camouflage that is rooted in the sacrificial oak imagery of ancient paganism. We have to destroy the roots of modernity in the Jews to return to a more nativist, primitivist, localist, Volkish tradition. That's what we're seeing right here. This is recapitulating, this is validating essentially Mark Musser's hypothesis quite a number of years prior. Shout out to Mark Musser for his commitment to this thesis and writing his book over 10 years. Continuing with Goodrick Clark, page 300. Some New Age ideas eulogize nature and primitive peoples in a gilded vision of the ancient past, while environmental extremists question the value of human civilization. These ideas originally had their roots in left-wing dissent, but their increasing tendency toward conspiracy beliefs and despair indicate their susceptibility to millenarian and mystical ideas on the far right. Discouraged by the impervious advance of modern technological society and the global economy, many have retreated to mental subcultures in which all manner of fantastic and threatening plots seem plausible to the extent that enables the protocols to find new readers and believers. As yet, the New Age has little room for Hitler worship or Nazi UFOs, but it is noteworthy that Rainbow Ark has already speculated that many old Nazis, this is crazy, have reincarnated in the bodies of modern Israelis as a way of karmically balancing former hatreds. Among such marginal beliefs, all kinds of reevaluation are possible. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that like we can't, like, we don't have room for the Nazis, but maybe the Nazis reincarnated in the form of the modern Israel and the Jews. It's still the Jews' fault. The Jews are Nazis. All kinds of reevaluation are possible. Like, at this point, you could hear Goodrick Clark like face palming, like, what am I reading? Right? As we have seen, continuing on, conspiracy theory may be traced to ancient religious ideas involving humanity's thrall to an evil lower god who created matter in the inferior realm. Only the intervention of a higher, merciful god can enable man to attain spiritual redemption. These dualist ideas were integral to Gnosticism, Marcionism, Manichaeanism, and other heretical movements in the early history of Christianity. So humanity's thrall to an evil lower god who created matter, and the intervention of a higher, merciful god can enable man to attain spiritual redemption. That's Gnosticism. Again, Gnosticism, Marcionism, Manichaeanism, and other heretical movements. These ideas have to show up. We're enthralled to an evil god, and we need a higher, merciful god to intervene to liberate us. Notice that throws out Christ. God already has intervened to redeem us from our sin. So there's a rejection of the notion of original sin in here, that it's not us. It's not, I need to be saved from my own sinfulness. It's, we need to be saved from this external wickedness. I'm good. I'm not evil. They're the evil ones. And I need another God to intervene in history to redeem me from the other evil people. No, bro, I'm sorry to tell you, the human heart is deceitfully wicked. Who can know it? But when you reject that form of inner accountability, you end up in some pretty dark places. When you reject biblical theology, biblical cosmology, and biblical anthropology, by now you know the rest. Within a religious worldview, all suffering, disorder, and strife posit the existence of evil. I agree with that. Personified as the devil or Antichrist, with the Jews often cast as his representatives on earth, such dualist dynamics offered a powerful demonology in medieval Christianity. The Patriot movement discourse on the Illuminati spreading AIDS, negotiating with evil extraterrestrials, and enslaving mankind through microchip mind control and a demonic New World Order openly proclaims its inspiration of the protocols of the Elders of Zion, the modern 19th century rendition of medieval anti-Semitic fantasies. That's a rumor about the Jews from Stephen Eric Bronner, and that is also referenced in Warrant for Genocide by Norman Cohn. Continue with Goodrick Clark. Just as the protocols found a massive readership among the displaced and the disinherited in a changing world before and after the First World War, this new conspiracy discourse finds new converts among those bewildered and frustrated by the results of globalization at the beginning of the new millennium. I think that speaks for itself, right? New conspiracy discourse finds new converts among those bewildered and frustrated by the results of globalization at the beginning of the new millennium. There must be a reason for all this. I will find the one central reason. I will defeat it because I'm frustrated by globalism and modernism. It's a worldview of madness. It's hyper-rationalist in the G.K. Chesterton orthodoxy sense. This chapter began with the Oklahoma City bombing in April 1995 in the context of conspiracy beliefs amongst patriot militia and far-right groups in the United States. These beliefs are often rooted in anti-Semitic stereotypes, but also involve a wider rejection of bureaucracy and a mistrust of elites, be they political, corporate, or financial. A more recent and far worse terrorist atrocity in the United States demonstrates the far-right's growing hatred of government and society. On 11 September 2001, Islamic militant suicide pilots hijacked 3 civil airliners and flew them into the World Trade Center in New York and the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. In unforgettable scenes of catastrophe, the 2 110-story towers collapsed, bringing the combined death toll of the attacks to over 5,700 civilian lives. The U.S. government set about building a strategic coalition with European and many Muslim states to destroy the leading terrorist groups behind these crimes and their protecting states, notably the Taliban regime of Afghanistan. Attention was chiefly focused on Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda group as the chief suspects, but other terrorist groups were also targeted, including the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, the Algerian Armed Islamic Group, the GIA, the Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah in the Levant. Members of these groups had been responsible for attacks on the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut in 1983, the Luxor tourist massacre of 1997, and the bombing of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998. These groups go beyond their motive of creating a Palestinian state and the destruction of Israel by turning on its American protector. Put that in your mind. Go beyond destroying Israel and turning on its American protector. Remember that. In their call for jihad or holy war against, quote, the great Satan of America, the supposedly demonic representative of secularization and materialism, these militant Islamicists enact a counter-crusade against the Jews and Christians. The struggle reflects Samuel P. Huntington's, quote, clash of civilizations as the key flashpoint of this new century. The far right exempted itself from the outrage that swept the United States and Britain. Instead, many sympathized with the Islamic militants against the quote, East Coast, code for American Jewry's influence in world finance and foreign policy relating to support for Israel. Some American neo-Nazis went so far as to praise the terrorist attacks. Tom Metzger of White Aryan Resistance called the World Trade Center attacks an example of, quote, victory or Valhalla for Aryans to take note of, meaning that this is a good example. You got to be the dude to start the revolution. Victory or Valhalla. Well, a member of the National Alliance, quote, said, the enemy of our enemy, i.e. the Jews, is for now at least our friend, end quote. Member of the National Alliance, the enemy of our enemy is for now at least our friend. The enemy of the Jews, the Muslims, is our friend. far-right extremism. 2002. What I've been saying. When you have a totalizing worldview of hatred of the Jews, all kinds of things become laudable that are actually horrible. And we're seeing that again today. None of this is new. The enemy of our enemy, i.e. the Jews, is for now at least our friend, quote, end quote, and wished that his comrades had half as much fortitude as the Islamic suicide pilots. As indicated in previous chapters, the American, British, and German far right has often courted rogue states such as Libya, Iran, and Iraq against the Jews and the West in their search for allies against the, quote, New World Order. None of this is new. Lincoln Rockwell and American neo-Nazi groups of the 1960s were actually ultra-conservative and loyalist patriots. By contrast, the far right today sees itself not only at war with the U.S. government, but with the American people themselves. The neo-Nazis even seek alliances with enemies whose totalitarian, theocratic, and millennial instincts are a mirror of their own. The neo-Nazis even seek alliances with the enemies whose totalitarian, theocratic, and millennial instincts are a mirror of their own. None of this is new. None of this is new. So we're just over 2 hours in, and I haven't gotten to the conclusion, but I need to run off to dinner now. So I will record a separate, perhaps shorter piece with the conclusion. Maybe I'll put these two together and instead of doing a bonus 8th session. But just as I close this conspiracy beliefs in the New World Order, I really hope, if you've been paying attention to the headlines for the past, call it couple months, that all of this hits you like a ton of bricks, that we're seeing the exact same thing. Even if you've never heard of Serrano, Savitu Davey, Lincoln Rockwell, I said it already. You've heard of some of these ideas. You've heard of, if you've been in the conspiracy world, you've heard of David Icke. You've heard of black helicopters. You've heard of, New World Order, microchips, fluoride water, right? You've heard of all this stuff. Everyone by this point in America has. And it's so massively popular in so many influencers and podcasters. And it all traces itself back to Bill Cooper. Not only him, but certainly to him. And he reprinted the protocols, and that same worldview goes forward. And it gets carried in, and now it's on everyone's phones. Every single day. It is inescapable. The well has been poisoned from the start. And if you're deep in this world, as I was, you have to repent. You have to. And again, it's not that conspiracies of a sort don't exist, but it's this totalizing belief in the worldview promoted by the protocols that must be repented of. It must be. This idea of this superhuman, supernatural, all-controlling, all-encompassing conspiracy from which there is no escape produces despair and produces isolation and produces madness. It doesn't produce fruitfulness. It can't. You raise your children to be separatists. How far does that go until your kids recognize, like, the world didn't end? I thought we were going to be invaded by UFOs in 2000. Well, that didn't come to pass. And I don't, maybe the UFOs are extraterrestrial, or maybe the UFOs are Nazis, or maybe we're going to leap into hyperspace, or maybe we're going to go through the rapture, or whatever is going to happen. It's all going to happen today. These worldviews, and the rapture view is not as popular as it once was, but the conspiracy worldview of it's all going to come down any minute now. And everything is under control of the hidden hand, whether you call them Illuminatis or elites or Jews, which is usually where it ends up anyway. It's all going to come down. The tyranny is right around the corner. It produces despair and anxiety and a constant, almost like a navel gazing into these topics. And it doesn't produce fruitfulness and the peace that passes understanding, because it doesn't admit the existence of a sovereign and saving God. It doesn't admit that through repentance and confession and faith, you can get the creator of the universe on your side to protect you from whatever schemes of the devil, to protect you from the wickedness in high places. But it comes at the cost of your repentance and faith. And that sanctification process transforms the way you understand the whole world, because it transforms the way that you understand yourself. And it transforms the way that you understand the cosmos. Now, I don't mean to get all presuppositionalist with this, but you can kind of see where it kind of goes in that direction. to say, yeah, all that stuff might be real, but I put my faith in the creator of the universe, who chose me from before the foundations of the world. And as long as I stay in his flock, guided by the good shepherd, and thy rod and thy staff protect me, but I can't do what I want. I can't be the source of my own values. I follow God's law. That's the true escape from all of this. Otherwise, it's constant fear, constant paranoia, constant rabbit holes, and investigating and digging in a new thing to feel despair about because the conspiracy has just turned over a new leaf. The old conspiracy didn't work out. The new conspiracy is what was actually intended. Meet the old boss, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. None of this is new. It goes back to 1990 and Bill Cooper. It goes back further than that to Miguel Serrano and David Lane, or it goes back further than that to Savitri Devi and Wilhelm Landig. It goes back further than that to Julius Evola. It goes back further than that to Colin Jordan, to Lincoln Rockwell, but it goes back even further than that to the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. And now this is the worldview, the Antichrist worldview, that is defining politics, particularly on the right, and its ascendancy. And, it's a worldview that needs to be repented of for a much better, much more peace-inspiring view on reality, where true peace and fruitfulness is possible, because it promises true redemption, not without a little suffering here on earth, but all rights being wronged, all things coming to light, the final judgment, a resurrected earth, resurrected bodies, and freedom from all this. The end has already been determined from the beginning. And we just got our little time to walk with God and walk with Christ and see it all unfold. And through repentance and faithfulness and daily disciplines of holy habits and, corporate worship in the church and family worship at home and scripture reading and prayer, we can have a measure of peace amidst all that and a hope for a future and a legacy. The conspiracy world produces none of that. None of that. And so on that note, I'm going to go have dinner with my family. And so maybe I'll release this as its own episode and do the conclusion separately. Maybe I'll put the two together. We'll figure that out later. But in the meantime, I hope this chapter has given you much to think about where these beliefs show up in your own life. And again, you don't have to take my word for it. You can read Black Sun for yourself and chase down all of his sources and read them all and see what he's talking about and ask if this worldview and these ideas have far too much infiltrated your daily life and what they are producing for you and have been producing for you for a long time. Because there is a better way. There is a better way, promised by God through Christ our Savior, in the presence of the Holy Spirit. So, Lord bless you all. Thank you for listening, and just one more quick step to take before we finish up Black Sun. All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. God bless.